that we're going to be transparent and we're going to take responsibility for our actions in the past. I do think that there are certain circumstances where there was smoke but no fire. And I think as a company, we have to defend ourselves and work within kind of the appropriate frameworks. And my goal is just to get beyond this stuff.
But some of these things like pricing policies, surely they go right to the heart of what Uber is, or am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think they do, but I think that there's a way of being smart but transparent at the same time, and that's where we've got to take the company.
Take me through governments. When you talk to governments privately, do they talk any differently than they do publicly?
Governments?
Yes, governments.
I think that they are honestly a bit relieved with how we are engaging with them, because I think that the engagement is now real. I think they feel like we're out there, we're genuine because we've learned our lessons of the past, and I do think that we can take, for example, the data that we have in terms of traffic and in terms of movement of our drivers and riders, and we can use that data to partner up with cities in order to solve congestion issues, because congestion doesn't help anyone. It wastes enormous amounts of time for consumers. It hurts the environment. And I think that we are aligned with cities, for example, to partner with them in a fundamental way to solve these problems. And I do think that when these are conversations that a number of regulators and cities have wanted to have with us for many years, and I think we are really engaging with them at a depth that I think is going to create a real win-win going forward.
Do you think you were too confrontational on this before?
Yeah, I do. I think that the company was pushing growth. And listen, any innovator, to some extent, the innovation is about questioning past kind of present practices. It's about breaking things, the Facebook breaking things. We just went a step and a half too far. And what I want to keep, hopefully, is the best of both worlds, which is this spirit of innovation, the spirit of can-do, et cetera, but the responsibility of partnership. We don't know better than you. We're actually going to work with you, of actually having dialogue and respect for our city partners, for regulators, and then continuing to take risks and continuing to do daring things. And I think we can accomplish that.
Imagine this audience here is a collection of mayors or a collection of city officials, and you want to depict, this is the Year Ahead conference, depict what the years ahead in this thing are going to be like. How far is driverless cars going to go? You talked just a few days ago about the idea of there being flying cars in 10 years' time. Can you just give a description of what you think transport is going to look like?
Well, I think that we think there are three keys to transport and where the industry is going: autonomous, electric, and shared. And I think all three are necessary in order to get to the next level of city planning, et cetera. There are many cities where up to a fifth of the space taken in these cities is taken by parking and storing these cars. And so I do think that you need autonomous, you need electric, and you need shared. And I do think it's going to take some time. True autonomy for every single use case is some ways away. What we bring to bear is our developing autonomy, and we will have autonomous cars on the road, I believe, within the next 18 months, not as a kind of a test case, but as a real case out there. And over a period of time, we're going to bring autonomous transportation and feather it in with the non-autonomous transportation with drivers.
What does feathering in mean?
Feathering in means
to a layman like me? Crashing.
Yeah, feathering in means if you're, for example, in Phoenix, and you make a request to go from A to B, which is what you do with Uber, there will be 95% of cases where we may not have everything mapped perfectly, or the weather may not be the right weather, or there may be an accident on the road, or you may not have 2 or 3 ways of getting from A to B, where you may say, you know what, that's not an autonomous use case. We're going to send a driver to pick that person up. For 5% of cases, everything is going to fall into place. And we will send an autonomous car. The user will be able to pick, do you want, there's an autonomous car, yes or no? And we'll be able to service that A for B. That 5% is going to go to 10 and 15 and 20 as our computers and our algorithms learn more and more about what it takes to drive in a city in a real life situation. And every minute of every day, that driver, that computer is going to get better and know Phoenix better and better and better. And in 5 years, we'll have the perfect driver in Phoenix. We will have to retrain that driver in every single city. We're going to have to build out 3D maps of these cities. And it will take time, but over a period of time, you essentially have a driver who becomes the perfect driver. It'll take 10 to 15 years, but that's the feathering in that I'm talking about.
And will a child born today, will they ever need to learn how to drive?
A child born today? No, I don't think so.
So within sort of 20 years from now, we will...
I don't think so. Listen, I hear some groans.
And also,
I heard a couple of groans. 1.3 million people die from car crashes every year. 1.3 million people die from car crashes every year. That doesn't count an estimated 20 to 50 million people that are injured. Okay, this is actually a public safety issue. If you look at cars, 96% of cars, 96% of time, cars are sitting there not being used. It is a huge amount of pollution that's caused by these cars being in the road, and a huge amount of wasted time. So the safety is there. Electrification is absolutely key. Sharing these platforms is going to allow us to be much safer and also put our assets where they add value.
But it's quite interesting because when you first came in, I remember you sounding somewhat more skeptical about self-driving cars. You've been converted. Is that a?
The choir has spoken, and I'm listening. It's pretty exciting technology out there. But again, it will be a hybrid technology for some period of time.
What about flying cars? That came as a slight surprise.
Yes, that's a great project that we're working on. It's called Uber Elevate. And it is actually about battery technology.
It would have helped a lot of people here.
I know. I wish that I was available. We'll launch it here if we can. But battery technology is allowing us to have multiple rotors on planes, or helicopters, if you want to call them that. These rotors that are much smaller will be much quieter than helicopters are. Much quieter, much safer. If you add sharing into the equation, you can actually get the economics of going from A to B. We think within 5 to 7 years to a place where normal people would think about taking these flying cars. That'll be the beginning, and then it's about scaling. And we're working with a number of partners right now.
Do you think the regulation on flying cars, I've heard some proponents of it argue that it might be easier than it has been on driverless cars, because driverless cars, you have to deal with existing roads, existing everything. Flying cars, essentially, you're going into unconquered space.
I think that mayors that are forward-thinking understand that traffic and pollution are a real issue, and I think flying cars can be a significant solution to traffic issues in cities. And these cars, to start with, they're going to be very specific. They'll be kind of highways in the air. There'll be very specific routes that these flying cars go on. They're not going to be able to take you to your backyard and land in your backyard. There'll be these skyports. So there'll be very specific routes that you go on. And I think if you build a regulatory framework that has that kind of structure around it, I think you get to a better solve.
Can I drag you back, somewhat reluctantly, back to the real world? But you have Rajiv Misra, who came in with you from SoftBank.
Yes.
He's going to become a director. Last week, he said that Uber should focus on repairing its market share in the US and on key European markets, rather than going going to new ones. Do you agree with that? Is that the way you look at Uber?
I think one of the fundamental strengths of Uber is the global scope that we have. This is
you
a brand.
had that motto, everywhere. What's it? Everywhere for everyone.
Yeah, everywhere for everyone.
Do you want to make it some places for some people?
No, we like the everywhere for everyone. It's much sexier than some places for some people. That's
telling me.
Just not interesting. I do think seriously though the global scope that our company brings is important. Our being able to build technology that we can amortize essentially everywhere in the world is hard, but it is part of the fundamental value that we introduce. So I would look at Uber very much as a global brand. That said, we're going to look at all opportunities, but at this point we are leaning forward, and 2018 for us is going to be very much a lean forward year for the company.
But without, I'm not trying to create new boardroom tension at Uber, but that would appear that SoftBank is keener on a more limited idea, whilst you're keener on everywhere for everyone.
Well, listen, SoftBank is a very important shareholder. They're our largest shareholder, and many of our shareholders have opinions over what's the right thing to do. Ultimately, the governance of the company is going to be at the board, and we'll have those discussions at the board, and we'll set our long-term strategy and then execute on it.
One of the things which Uber played, perhaps not very fortunately, a role in was the whole sexual harassment questions and everything to do with that. I suppose one very obvious question, do you think that you have solved that part of the culture? But secondly, do you think that this is a real revolution and it's going to stick?
I think that what was happening at Uber was serious, and I think that while what Uber went through was difficult, I think the Susan Fowler blog was probably one of the best things that happened for Uber, and it certainly started a movement that's an incredibly important movement of the company. I'd be reticent to say that it's solved.
Yeah.
But it's not an endemic issue within the culture of the company, and I think the company has learned, and I think the company took very harsh and appropriate steps to make sure that kind of behavior is absolutely clear, that kind of behavior is not accepted in any way, shape, or form of the company, regardless of where you are, regardless of if you're a great performer or not. So I think we're at the right place for Uber as a company, but I think in general, we're not where we need to be in terms of women in senior positions, making sure that we're welcoming of women in technology, and we help women really build their careers within our company. There's a great kind of bottoms-up energy there, but we're not where we need to be, and we have a lot of work ahead of us.
On the issue of, you talked about the top performers, is that looking back, and also I suppose looking forward for many of the people in this room, because there are a lot of people's businesses which have been affected by this. If you had to give lessons to other people who are now looking at this issue, perhaps more seriously than they have done before, is the really bad issue, and I suppose I'm thinking some ways about the media industry in this, is that giving top performers more room for maneuver or whatever than people, or more discretion than people thought? Is that top performers need to be treated the same as everybody else?
I think they absolutely need to be held accountable. The really valuable lessons that I got early in my life was actually through Jack Welch, and he said, it's very tempting to allow top performers to misbehave in any way, but for me, he was talking about being aligned with the CEO. Sometimes you allow top performers, the tendency is, well, let them get away with some kind of behavior that is not the right behavior because they're so good. And what Jack told me very early on is that it's the top performers who are problematic culturally that are the most dangerous because they have followership within the company because people look up to them. So he's like the dumb person who is bad culturally. He's not the problem because everyone says, well, that's a dumb person, so who cares? It's the smart person who has followership, so it is incredibly important for the top performers to actually be held to account more radically than anyone else because they're the ones who have followership at the company, and they have to set the example. So for me personally, that has absolutely guided how I've managed. Expedia was a company that had, excellent cultural values, and one of the first things we did at Uber was to go out and reset our cultural values, and we call them norms, because to me, it's not just these values that you put on the wall and kind of people stare at and you know, it's all nice. It's about behavior. And we set out to change behavior at Uber, and I think that the company was thirsting for it, and we are starting on a path, and I believe it's going to be a positive path.
An inevitable question, I hope you won't regard it as a cheap shot, but you talked about smart people who have followers throughout a company. I mean, Travis would seem to be the epitome of that sort of figure. Is that, do you think of him as being in that category of people that Jack Welch was talking about?
I think, listen, Travis was the CEO of the company, and he had incredible followership, and he was held to account, right? I mean, he's no longer the CEO of the company, and he's a board member. He's a big investor, and so he's absolutely going to play a part on the board. But we've also been very clear as a company that we do have to make a break with the past, with how we behaved as a company. And to some extent, with the new CEO being a very different kind of a CEO. So in the end, you have to be held accountable, and I think that Travis was held accountable, and at this point, he's a board member and a constructive one at that.
If you look around the world now, where do you see the next competitors to Uber? You've obviously got Lyft breathing down your neck.
Yes, yes.
Where else do they come from?
Well, I think that as you move into a world of autonomy, the position of the car manufacturers, the position of, for example, Google, who's developing Waymo and Waymo autonomous technology, you're going to get a lot of players interested in the space. And a lot of people think about Uber and ride sharing as a significant enterprise, and it is. But the fact is that we account for less than 1% of miles driven on the road now. When autonomy comes in, that number over the next 10 years is going to be closer, I believe, to 15 to 20%. So, because we're not yet a true alternative to car ownership, and I believe that as you bring autonomous and you bring the price of mobility down and make it available to everybody, everywhere, then we become a real alternative to car ownership, and that really opens up the market for us, but it also opens us up to many more competitors.
And is Google at the forefront of those competitors at the moment?
Google is one of many. I think that they've developed very strong autonomous technology, but what we think, which is exceptional, is having autonomous technology and the network under one roof, which allows us to use autonomous in a very practical way, nearer than you think.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from New York, it's Monday afternoon, the last day of August, the last trading day of this month. Kind of the last day of summer, it feels like, to some extent, although not technically. Alex Steele, back home in our Interactive Broker studio. How are you?
Yeah, are you really live from New York? Or am I the one live from New York? And you're like live in Westchester.
Oh, we're going to do this again. We're going to do this again all week.
All
week. Boy, it's so good to do the town and gown with you all over again. Alex Steele in for Carol Masser, who's taking a well-deserved vacation. We got a lot to talk about today. It is the last day of trading here in August. I'm in the burb. She's in the city. Charlie Pellet, he's got an update on the trading day. Hey, Charlie.
All right. Well, hello there. Just down the block from Alex Steele, we have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ trading mixed right now. S&P on track for its 5th straight monthly advance, best streak in almost 2 years. Let me give you the numbers first, give you the story behind the numbers. Right now, the S&P is lower, down half a point. It's been fluctuating 35.07 on the S&P. We've got NASDAQ pushing higher again today, up another 111 points, up by about 1%. The Dow is down 213 points. points, a drop there of about 0.7%. 10-year up 8/30 seconds with a yield of 0.69%. Gold is up 0.4%, 19.72 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.6%, 42.72 a barrel on WTI. Most stocks lower after China threw a wrench into American companies' efforts to buy TikTok. Also, investors continue to evaluate the outlook for global growth and central bank stimulus to counter the pandemic. Recapping, equities are trading mixed with the S&P down now by 1 point. Live from Brooklyn, I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, we got it all covered here for you on Business Week on a Monday afternoon. Jason Kelly and Alex Steele. Let's set the Business Week agenda to start. Sarah Ponzek, cross-asset reporter for Bloomberg. She's on the phone in New York City. Dave Wilson, stocks editor for Bloomberg. He joins us from New Jersey. Dave, I want to start with you. Tell us about this trade, what you're seeing on this last day of August.
Boy, I tell you, I mean, it's not a whole lot of direction if you look at the broader market. It's basically the tech companies, you know, the consumer discretionary category, which includes Amazon.com, definitely helping the S&P 500, and healthcare. That's it out of the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500 that are higher. So you've got 8 of them down. You know, you look at where the broader market has been over the course of the day. I mean, it got to its lows late morning New York time, but really there hasn't been a whole lot of direction all day. You know, if you want direction, you kind of have to focus on, you know, individual stocks. I mean, Amazon's one example of that. I mean, they got approval to start flying drones to use in their delivery service, and you know, that stock's up 2.3%. And then you come to the stock splits. I mean, Apple and Tesla both completed their splits on Friday after the close. So today's the first day of trading at post-split prices. Apple's up 4.7%, one of the biggest gains in the S&P 500, certainly helping to support the index. And then there's Tesla in a class of its own, up almost 10.5%. And that, you know, is after a gain for this month. It looks like it's going to be the biggest in more than 7 years, since May 2013. That was the last time you've seen Tesla move as much as it has this month. And just checking on what that gain looks like as we speak, we're talking about an advance of more than 70%. 7-0.
Wow.
So poetic, Dave Wilson, on a Monday. That was such a passionate delivery there of Tesla. What I also find interesting, though, is what's not really trading, Sarah, and that is certain platforms on, say, I don't know, E-Trade, Ameritrade, Robinhood. That was like a huge glitch in the middle of the day at the end of August. What'd you make?
That's right. Well, all year long, at least Robinhood has been pegged for having issues with outages, especially on some of the most notable days back in March, on Sundays when we saw a very steep decline. Well, this morning, it seemed as though brokerages really across the spectrum were being affected. You name a few of them, but TD Ameritrade, E-Trade, Vanguard even, Robinhood. There was a bit of an uproar on social media. A lot of people, I mean, when you have trades, you can't get out of them. This is a big day. Some people pointing to stock splits. We don't know if that's necessarily the cause of this. I mean, these brokerages had plenty of time to prepare for this. It's not like the stock splits caught anyone off guard. But I do want to point out one more statistic as it relates to these splits, because it is unbelievable. Dave, as you said, was a bit poetic, but for good reason. I mean, you look at Apple right now adding about 80 points to the NASDAQ, Tesla adding over 40 points to the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ 100 is up about 140 points. So not necessarily making up today's entire gain, the benchmark right now at 1.2%, but nearly all of it.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Amazing.
That's a drop the mic kind of moment.
Yeah.
But I also have to wonder, like, what other stocks are ripe for this kind of thing? I was talking to Dan Ives at Wedbush, and it's hard to find where he's not bullish on tech stocks, Jason. But it's like, does a Microsoft need to do this? Is an Amazon next in line? That kind of thing.
Yeah, is this going to be a trend, do you think, Sarah?
You know, you hear some strategists talking about it. Peter Cheer over, he was on Bloomberg Television this morning talking about just this, and he's been putting out some research notes on this. He had actually sent out a research note this weekend, and he said this is more so actually focused for corporations, not so much for investors, saying, look, if this is something that is actually somehow going to drive the perception of value and add a boost to your share prices, why not do this in the year of 2020? And it has been a trend over the years. We have seen stock splits kind of fall out of favor. They're not very popular anymore. But after we saw the likes of Apple and Tesla do this and the reaction that we have seen, you have to kind of question if this is going to be a trend that's going to pick up once again. Of course, yet to be seen, but something to keep in mind.
All right, Dave Wilson, give us a quick tease for the chart of the day.
The chart. Well, you know, we had a few changes in the Dow Jones Industrial Average today, so I kind of look back and see, well, okay, how do these shares do over time? Like, since the last time you had a move like this.
Am I going to get the song? Do you know how much this segment stresses me out? Do you know what this does to me, Dave Wilson?
I know exactly what it does to you, Alex, and I will tell you, I haven't picked the song yet,
boy.
You have a chance at least.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Look toward Broadway. Just look toward
Broadway.
Broadway.
But he's never going to do that. But I did get Crazy for You by Madonna. That was the one thing that I got.
Oh, no, you also got Is That All There Is by Peggy Lee.
That's true. But I didn't get the Led Zeppelin song, which was pretty sad.
You can actually get all the songs that I've used this month on my Spotify playlist. I put that out on Friday. I'll update it today. And once that's done, maybe we'll throw it up on Twitter and elsewhere.
Absolutely. All right, Dave Wilson, thank you so much. We'll catch up with you at 3:30. Alex Seal's already preparing herself emotionally for that. Sarah Ponczak, cross-asset reporter for Bloomberg. She joined us on the phone from New York City. Let's briefly do the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day, one number that tells us a lot. Today's number, 6 million. U.S. cases of COVID-19 have hit 6 million as outbreaks accelerated in colleges specifically. Public health experts saying students should stay on campus as it's easier to isolate those sick or exposed and trace their contacts. This is the season in many ways, Alex Steele, and this is a big test of the outbreak.
Yeah, but I think it's really
back
interesting that they want them to stay on campus so they can track them, which actually makes some kind of sense, especially if they get tested but they're not necessarily super sick, and then they go home and they spread it, and then you can't find who they met. So that's actually interesting take.
Yeah, it was a really interesting story. I saw the Bloomberg piece over the weekend that got into a lot of that. So that was that's certainly something to watch. All right, we are going to talk about the virus. We're going to talk about insider trading with the editor-in-chief emeritus, the founding editor of Bloomberg News, Matt Winkler. He's going to be along. Got a couple CEOs. We got Warren Buffett making some moves when it comes to Japan. And an eco-conscious swimwear line. Come on, where else do you get that, Alex?
I don't know. I'm kind of in like, what is that? What does that mean?
I know.
Like, is it made out of grass?
Kelp.
Like, is your like can you also eat it? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm actually really interested in how that works, especially because like who's swimming right now? Maybe I'm biased because I'm in New York City, but that's another one.
See, it's that New York City thing coming back. Yeah, there you go.
Be a theme.
Yeah, I went on vacation, then had to quarantine. So
you did?
I did go swimming. Yeah.
Where'd you go? Did you have plane?
Virgin Islands. Yeah.
Whoa.
We'll talk about that later. All right, let's get down to Washington now. Nancy Lyons is there. She's got World National Headlines. Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Jason. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is in Pennsylvania today addressing the handling of the demonstrations, not only in Kenosha, but in other cities across the country. It's his first speech since accepting the party's nomination.
The job of a president is to tell it straight from the shoulder, tell the truth, to be candid, to face facts, to lead, not to incite. That's why I'm speaking to you today. The incumbent president is incapable of telling us the truth, incapable of facing the facts, and incapable of healing.
President Trump plans to travel to Kenosha, Wisconsin tomorrow, despite the governor there asking him to stay away due to concerns that his visit could spark more violence. Well, police say most of the people arrested in those Kenosha demonstrations against police brutality since the shooting of Jacob Blake were not city residents. Police records show 100 of the 175 people arrested since Blake was shot and left paralyzed. 102 have addresses outside the city, including 44 different cities. Well, House Minority Leader Steve Scalise is conceding today. He tweeted over the weekend a doctored clip of Joe Biden speaking to disabled activist Andy Barkin. The clip was Barkin interviewing Biden, asking about shifting public safety funds to mental health and social services, but the word police was inserted to make it sound as though Biden explicitly expressed support for redirected funding from police departments. Scalise today on Fox admitted the clip should not have been edited. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nance, thanks so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly and Alex Steele here with you on a Monday, and we're bringing it back right here to New York City. Some people are leaving.
Oh my gosh, this is an amazing story. So basically, it uses some data by United Van Lines that tracks mobility. And they say that far more people moved to Vermont, Idaho, Oregon, and South Carolina than left during the pandemic. And it was reverse was true for New York and New Jersey, where residents fled to Florida, Texas, and other Sun Belt states between March and July.
Yeah. I tell you, one thing that I have seen anecdotally that this totally validates is a number of people here in the burbs even, moving to Vermont, New Hampshire, those sorts of places, and either remoting into school, into their existing school system, or just enrolling their kids there. They may have second homes. They may be renting a home. I think this is a real thing.
Well, and you have to wonder, is it like a 9/11 and it comes back with certain incentives, or is this a permanent shift? And you get different takes. But anecdotally also, my husband and I are always looking for another apartment that's bigger, and we have our areas that we find out literally every day, like 5 or 6 apartments, price drop. And I'm talking like, 95K, 200,000 price drops. Like, these are significant numbers because there's really that urge to sell. I just wonder how long that actually lasts, because the Sun Belt states got hit too. It's not like they were totally immune.
Right. Well, I think the question is, what does the space, especially when you think about some of these other places, especially when you think about like Texas and Colorado and other types of places, and certainly Vermont and New Hampshire, they've got a lot of wide open space up there too.
But you gotta love the Jerry Seinfeld op-ed, right, in the Times. Energy, attitude, and personality cannot be remoted through even the best fiber optic line. You cannot be rude through Zoom.
That's right.
In the same way that you can on a train platform.
I know. I figured that you read that and did like a little plus 1,000.
I kind of liked it like a bunch of times.
Yeah, that's good. All right, we're going to keep talking about that. It's one of our favorite stories to keep track of, where people are going and where they're leaving. This is Bloomberg.
and the Ad Council. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Final trading day of August. We've got the U.S. stock market trading mixed right now. The Dow decidedly lower. S&P higher, little changed. It's been fluctuating between gains and losses. Right now, the S&P is up by 0.5%. NASDAQ is higher by 114 points for the NASDAQ Composite Index. That is a gain of 1%. S&P, by the way, on track for its 5th straight monthly advance, best streak in almost 2 years. The 10-year up 7/32 with a yield right now of 0.69%. Gold is up 0.2% higher by $4 the ounce at $19.68. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.7%, $42.69 a barrel. Recapping, S&P up by 1 point. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week here on a Monday. Jason Kelly and Alex Steele. Well, let's talk about the virus, where we are, and especially who it's affecting. And it is affecting certain populations disproportionately, that is for sure. Dr. Ken Redcross joins us, founder of Red Cross Concierge. He's a board-certified internal medicine physician, also an author, joining us on the phone from L.A. Dr. Redcross, really nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me on, guys.
We're really grateful to you for spending some time with us because this is a really important issue. You know, when this pandemic started, we felt like, I think in many ways, well, this is indiscriminate. You know, this is a virus doesn't see color, it doesn't see income. And yet we know that ultimately, in reality, that's not true. And we've certainly learned that lesson. And I know you have watched that very closely. Tell us what you found.
Yeah, you know, Jason, that's an important point. You're right. Most viruses in this case, they're agnostic. They don't care, right? But what's happened this time is that COVID-19 has really shined a big light on the healthcare disparities that we have here in the United States between those who are minorities and those who are not. And so we're seeing that kind of break out into different little sessions now because of the differences in the disparities that we're seeing. And it's been pretty stark.
I guess the question is why. We've heard many different explanations. Is it the jobs? Is it access to health care pre this? Is it pre-existing conditions? What are some of the reasons?
You know, Alex, actually, it's a little bit of everything you said. So look, think about it this way. There's a medical side to this because the disease states that are really affecting those who get the coronavirus, such as diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, and also obesity, are very common in the minority community, especially African-American community. Then on the second side of your question there, Alex, we have those socioeconomic issues such as access to health care, such as income equality, such as issues with housing. That's when we get to the point where I always say that in those areas, social distancing is an absolute luxury, right? It can't happen. And so when you have all of those things come together, Alex, it's almost like a perfect storm.
So talk to us specifically about Black communities, if you will, Dr. Redcross, because we have seen some of that data, sort of take us down a level in terms of the data and help us understand some of those issues that you were just describing, and specifically in Black communities.
Yeah, so look, everyone, so it's important to understand, look, as they always say, you know, united is what we should be, right? Because if you're divided, we fall. And this is even more important because even if you're not African-American, these healthcare disparities affect all of us because whether it be on the healthcare system, the cost, I know this is a financial station, and those things impact us all. But when you're talking about what's going on in the community with those disease states that are in there, which all of them are associated with vitamin D deficiency as well. So it's important to hit in on that as well because vitamin D, guys, is not a treatment for the coronavirus, but what it does hit home is the importance of the immune system. And all these disease states that Alex asked me about when she says, well, why is this? All of those are affected by the immune system. And in our community, in the African-American community, we have been hit so hard. In fact, if you look at some of the studies out there, it says only about 20% of African Americans can actually telework. That just gives you a little bit of an idea of the sort of jobs that a lot of African Americans have and how hard that is to kind of stay out of harm's way, in addition to balancing your healthcare access as well.
So let me ask, there's been conversations of how you distribute the vaccine, and obviously, you know, those essential workers like, say, healthcare workers, nurses, doctors will get it first. But then there's been conversations around minority communities like the Black community. Is that do we want that? Because there's also a downside, I would think.
Well, we do, but there's a couple of challenges. So the big challenge is that as you're starting to find out, a lot of the vaccine companies are having a very hard time signing up minorities. They're having a hard time signing up minorities. Number one, it's back to that access issue, but it's also, Alex, because of some of the history that has been there with African Americans in the medical community, all the way back to the Tuskegee experiment in the 1930s or 40s. You may think, guys, gosh, that's almost 50 years ago, but believe it or not, it still runs rampant in the African American community to talk about, you know, I don't know if I'm going to take that vaccine. Remember Tuskegee experiment? I mean, those sort of things and skepticism are things that need to be faced head on as well. So the vaccine, when it comes, it needs to be tested in everyone. You can't test it in one group. So that's why it's so important to make sure there's an education piece for a lot of the minorities to really work on the skepticism and where we're headed with this vaccine and when we'll get the vaccine.
And so what is the right message then, especially to Black and African American communities around vaccines? What are you saying to folks to convince them?
Well, one of the things that, you know, you had mentioned, I wrote my book earlier called Bond, and the important thing there, never would I have known it'd be something we talk about in a pandemic, but my whole passion is the patient-doctor relationship. So it's those four things that are very important: trust, respect, empathy, and communication, especially in our community when you have to be trusted in order for me to put a vaccine in you, right? For us to have that discussion. Then there needs to be an equal respect to say, hey, look, it doesn't really matter how much melanin you have in your skin. Your life matters. Your health also matters. And then there has to be a feeling of empathy. It's important that we understand that you really understand kind of the struggles that we have each and every day that most of my friends and myself have been through as an African-American male. And then that communication piece is key. You need to be able to sit down with that person and kind of talk eye to eye and really communicate what you want to do and why it's so important for all of us.
All right, we're going to continue this conversation because we're getting into some really interesting and good stuff. Dr. Ken Redcross, founder of Red Cross Concierge. He's also the author of a book he was just discussing. It's called Bond, The Four Cornerstones of a Lasting and Caring Relationship with Your Doctor. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to talk about vitamin D, which he mentioned, which I want to ask him about as well, because I feel like vitamin D has been one of those things that we've all been told we have a deficiency, and I want to get his advice on that, Alex.
D, not C. I gotta be honest, I get confused.
I get confused with B, too.
B, yes, and E, I don't know.
Yeah, so many letters. All right, this is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Well, coming up, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Ken Redcross. He's a doctor and author. He's going to talk to us a little bit more about COVID-19, vitamin D, and what may be ahead this fall. Before we get back to him, let's get back to Charlie Pellet. He's got an update on the trade. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Jason Kelly. Happy Monday to you, by the way. Robinhood Markets and TD Ameritrade Holdings say they have resolved trading and other technical problems that were part of wider industry glitches, but Charles Schwab and Vanguard Group say they are working to resolve issues with their websites. Among other disruptions, thousands of customers have been lodging complaints on Down Detector. Most stocks are lower after China threw a wrench into companies' efforts to buy TikTok. Also, as investors evaluate the outlook for global growth and central bank stimulus to counter the pandemic. Here's where we stand. S&P 500 index is lower now by 2 points, down by 0.1%. The Dow is down 228 points, down 0.8%. NASDAQ continues to hold on to a 108-point gain now, up by 0.9%. 10-year up 7/30 seconds with a yield of 0.69%. Gold is up 0.2% at $19.68 the ounce. U.S. coronavirus cases have topped 6 million, with outbreaks accelerating on college campuses. Arizona, by the way, recorded the smallest one-day increase in cases since May, as that state continues to make progress in controlling the COVID-19 pathogen. Across the country, students have returned or are about to return as parents, educators, and health professionals debate the safest way to reopen schools. Dr. Joshua Sharfstein is vice dean at the Bloomberg Johns Hopkins School of Public Health.
Well, I think in areas where the case numbers have come way down, it really is possible to open, but open with precautions. I think that's still the lesson from around the world. And I think people are, in many cases, kind of debating about the precautions, about what's practical.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Nestle has agreed to buy Immune Therapeutics for $2.6 billion, adding a promising peanut allergy treatment to its portfolio of coffee, snacks, and water. Shares in Immune Therapeutics are surging now by about 170%. Recapping, U.S. equities, they're trading mixed, with the S&P down 3 points now, down 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. Let's get back to our conversation with Dr. Ken Redcross, founder of Red Cross Concierge, also the author of a book called Bond, The Four Cornerstones of a Lasting and Caring Relationship with Your Doctor. And Dr. Redcross, you had talked a little bit about vitamin D. Tell us more about that, because I feel like D is one of these things where every time I go for my checkup, I get told I'm deficient, and then I feel like I read that everybody's deficient, and maybe we shouldn't worry about it, but maybe we should. Like, what's the latest science here?
Well, I'll tell you. So it seems like, and you're right, as the world starts to kind of wake up to the importance of the message of vitamin D, it does seem that a lot of us are deficient. But in the African-American community, it's about 80% deficiency. In the Hispanic community, about 70%. And people may say, well, what does that kind of matter? Like I mentioned before, those disease states, whether it be heart disease, lung disease, and also I'll bring in obesity, they're all associated with lower vitamin D levels, which gives us a reason to think, what would happen if those vitamin D levels were optimal, guys? Where would that actually be? And the NIH even had a report that vitamin D deficiency could actually even be a plausible explanation for a higher mortality. Potentially, a lot of these studies are going on, but we see it clinically, and it's something that's easy to take and something that luckily is also inexpensive as well.
Okay, so before we move on to like why it's not getting more widespread adoption, can you explain to me what is vitamin D?
Sure. So vitamin D, everyone, that's that's nature's vitamin. That comes from the sun. This shows you how amazing our bodies are, everyone. That we actually make really not even a vitamin. It's really a hormone. It's a pro-hormone, and that's how important it is for our bodies. But we used to think it was all about bone health, but now we're learning vitamin D does so much more, especially when it comes to immunity. In fact, when you look at the levels you're supposed to have for your vitamin D, I kind of wear an Eastern medicine hat, guys, and a Western medicine hat. So my Western medicine hat tells you it's supposed to be around 30. But when you look at the Eastern medicine and some of the newer studies, our levels should be between 40 and 60. That's the whole point of making sure we talk about this, because I wanted to challenge everyone for a call to action to go to your doctor and get your vitamin D level checked. Or you can even go to a website such as powerofd.org where you can order at-home test kits. So that way, Alex, everyone can kind of see where they are on their levels. And as I like to say, get on my level is kind of the campaign I'm working with.
And so, just taking it sort of broader as we wrap up about the virus, what's your biggest concern going into the fall? We got kids going back to school, people increasingly going back to the office. What's your best advice and what's your biggest concern here?
Okay, everyone. So look, there's one blessing that is out there. Number one, unfortunately, we're seeing as the kids go by, the levels are going up a bit, but we've never used this much PPE and talked about hand washing ever than we have for this flu season coming. So that's one little thing to look forward to. But in going forward, we're going to continue practicing those things and look into things such as vitamin D, which is good for the entire family. You can talk to your pediatrician about that. There's so much information going on about the benefits of vitamin D that we all can take advantage of, because here, especially in the Northeast, I'm actually in New York now, guys. I moved back to New York.
Oh, okay.
In the Northeast, we don't get that sunlight for 4 or 5 months. So take advantage of what nature knows is important and recognize that almost every immune cell in our body has a receptor for vitamin D, which really lets us know how important it is for our health and our overall immunity.
All right.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say we really appreciate Dr. Ken Redcross, founder Red Cross Concierge. His book, Bond, it is the 4 cornerstones of a lasting and caring relationship with your doctor. Do you take vitamin D?
No.
Yeah.
But I don't take anything. I used
No
to take a multivitamin.
Yeah.
But then I got worried about
D
all
in
the
there.
stuff in it, the extra stuff. There was a really great piece. Did you guys do it? I was in the car listening to it, and it talked about how sometimes female vitamins have all this other stuff in it that you don't want to be taking.
Right.
So I have to do better research on it. It's on the list. It's on the list.
It's on the list of many things that you need to do more or less of, depending on what day we're talking about. Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where I definitely, when I go and get my checkup, as I said, I'm always vitamin D deficient.
Really? There's like interesting. Okay.
And I blame it on living in the North, sorry, New York City, but and its environs, because of exactly what Dr. Redcross said, which is it's darker, less sunlight during the winter time. You don't get that natural vitamin D. Anyway,
but don't you have aren't there also lamps that you can get, like is it vitamin C or vitamin D, where it like emulates the sun for the winter months?
Yeah, you can.
He's like, you can, but I'm not gonna.
But I'm not gonna, because I'm just mad about it being so cold and dark.
Oh, I see. That seems to be really smart.
Yeah, it is.
I'm not going to get that to help myself because I'm mad that it's dark.
Because I'm mad, because then I won't be able to be as mad about it being dark.
Fair enough.
Yeah, no, I'll look into it. I'll look into it in the same way that you're going to look into, vitamin D. It's on the list. All right, let's get down to Washington now. And Nancy Lyon, she has got world and national headlines. Hey, Nancy.
And I also have one of those seasonal affective disorder lights you were talking about right here in the booth. 78% of Americans appear to be worried COVID-19 vaccine approval process is being driven more by politics than science. A new survey from Stat and the Harris poll indicates 72% of Republicans, 82% of Democrats expressed such concerns. The results underscore those concerns that President Trump may pressure the FDA to approve or authorize emergency use of at least one vaccine prior to the election for political gain. Well, one issue that's taken a real hit during the pandemic, the ability to feed the masses. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports on an unprecedented hunger crisis.
As many as 132 million more people than projected could go hungry this year, and the increase could be 3 times higher than any spike this century. The pandemic is upending food supply chains, crippling economies, and eroding purchasing power. The spike is happening in every part of the world, even during a time of global food surpluses. The UN predicts hunger will be greater over the next decade than forecast before the pandemic. In Washington, I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
The first ever commercial flight from Israel to the United Arab Emirates has been completed. White House Special Advisor Jared Kushner and National Intelligence Chief Robert O'Brien were among the passengers on that flight. Kushner spoke about the two countries normalizing relations.
Barriers that exist can be broken if we only have the courage and the optimism and the vision to see them through.
Israel and the Emirates agreed earlier this month to work toward normalization. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts to more than 120 countries.
Thanks, Nancy. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly and Alex Steele. And just clarifying one thing that Dr. Red Cross said, when you go to get your vitamin D levels checked, I guess Western medicine, they say like 30-ish is good in terms of your levels for vitamin D, but Eastern meds say 40 to 60, and that's what he subscribes to. So when you get that checked, it's on the list.
It's on the list.
Alex,
I take my list very seriously.
I know you do. Listen, I know that to be true. I know something you also take seriously, as do I, is school for your daughter. And everybody's thinking about this, and you've got a lot of people getting creative there in New York City, especially about where this so-called school is going to happen.
Yeah, this is an article from the Journal, which basically looks that parents are sort of hunting around for small areas to conduct school. So there's this one story of a parent on the Upper West Side renting a 685 square foot children's music school with 2 windows that open out into a patio, and then hook up with a couple other parents to help share the costs, and then also wind up potting up with a teacher facilitator who basically will all teach them through remote learning. I mean, it makes sense, right? And it's good business for like the areas like my gyms or something, which clearly can't open. But this is just going to widen the disparity in inequality that we've already seen. Because who are the parents that are going to be able to do this? The wealthy parents, most likely white.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, these sorts of things, and I totally get it in terms of the pod idea, and you hear parents talking about that all the time, and that certainly makes sense. But yeah, it's a luxury to a large extent, and that widening gap. And there was a study by UNICEF that came out this morning that I was listening to a report on, just about how I believe it's a fifth of the world's population in terms of school-age kids have no real access to remote learning. So that gap is going to widen. So a story we will certainly continue to follow. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks continue to trade mixed. Stocks fell after China threw a wrench into companies' efforts to buy TikTok. Also, investors continue to evaluate the outlook for global growth. Doing much of anything on this final trading day of August, up now by just about half a point. We've got the Dow, a revamped Dow, trading lower by 190 points, down 0.7%. NASDAQ up 116, higher by 1%. 10-year up 132nd with a yield of 0.71%. Gold up 0.2%, 1968 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%, 42.78 a barrel. After their respective stock splits, both Apple and Tesla are trading at records. We've got Apple up by 4.5% right now. Tesla surging by 10.4%. Elon Musk, by the way, now the world's third richest person. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week here on a Monday afternoon. Jason Kelly and Alex Steele. Well, I've learned a few things in my time at Bloomberg News, and one of them is to really focus on the data, focus on the numbers, and they will tell you an amazing story. And there's a guy that I learned it from who is on the phone with us now, Matt Winkler, co-founder and editor-in-chief emeritus for Bloomberg, now Bloomberg Opinion columnist as well. He's got a terrific column about insider trading and a lack of regulation. Joel Weber pointed it out to us. Of course, we had already seen it, and we agreed that it would be the perfect thing to talk about in this edition of Bloomberg Business Week in terms of our radio show. So, Joel, set this up for us because this is a classic Winkler column.
Yeah, and I know that this has been one that Matt's been working on for a while, and it shows in the story because of, again, Jason, as you said, that emphasis on the data. And I think that, I want Matt to be able to speak to it directly, but the thing that it really stands out when you look at this is, to bring it back to Bloomberg and data, the terminal can do just incredible things. And a lot of it is just take emotions out of stuff, so you just get to see the data. So Matt, when you guys harnessed the terminal to sort of power this column, what was it that you guys were looking for?
So I think we're having a little bit of trouble on our end with Matt's line. But Joel, there's some very specific examples here that are well-known names, and it really is a lot around M&A, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the thing that I think Matt was about to probably say is when you can actually put the terminal, and one of the things that the newsroom has been big beneficiaries of is using automation to help tell stories. And BAI in particular are these automated insights. And when you remove the equation of just like, let's just see what a computer sees, the computer has begun to see some anomalies, and the M&A activity is one of great interest.
Yeah, and Alex, it's interesting too because these are transactions that are very well known. The ADT transaction and the Fitbit transaction specifically, I noticed because we talked a lot about them on our air here.
Yeah, and part of the story is sort of delving into all of that and saying, okay, when Google bought a stake in ADT, for example, that happened on August 3rd. But earlier, when there was no news, there were some trading alerts that the algos here at Bloomberg were able to see and flag. And then you sort of saw some of these anomalies and sort of bonds changing hands a couple days before, like 4 times more than the 5-week average, things that don't necessarily make sense. And then you have to ask the question, why is that happening? So I think we have Matt Winkler now. Matt, can you hear us now? We were talking about your column.
I can. Good to be with you.
Hey, Matt. So can you just take us through sort of how you came up with this? As Joel said, you've been working on this for a really long time.
Yes. Well, all credit is due actually to this wonderful team embedded in Bloomberg proper called Bloomberg Automated Intelligence. And this is really a whole team of people that is gathering and developing algorithms that enable us to see things we otherwise wouldn't see. And people call this artificial intelligence. I guess that's what it is. But it is unmistakably clear in the sense that it reveals trading patterns that we otherwise wouldn't see. And those trading patterns, which include a whole host of things, reveal insider trading that is repeated many, many times over the past 2 years. And we've got all kinds of examples to show that. You were talking about a couple of them before I joined you, but this is something that has been developing really for several years now. And I might add that Bloomberg, just to be sure about what it actually has, did a study recently of 5,000 U.S. companies during the past 2 years. And it found that 20% of the time, through its automated news, certain combinations of alerts, including stock trading, social media activity, credit default swaps, were followed by a mergers and acquisition announcement in 5 days. The ratio is triple the outcome if all anomalies were to occur randomly. So that's about as good and succinct a summary of how important this is.
So Matt, what are some of the telltale signs that that BAI is able to pick up on and notice that there's an anomaly?
Okay, so let's just take the most recent example, really, that we looked at here, my colleague Shinpei and I. At 6 a.m. on August 3rd, Google has bought a 6.6% stake in ADT Inc. That's the largest U.S. home security company for $450 million. As soon as trading begins, ADT appreciates 100%. Okay, so far so good. The stock market is open. But the headlines detailing the transaction really weren't a surprise, because more than a few people knew ADT was going to benefit from this event, which is big enough to be gaining Google's hitherto inaccessible technology. Now, how do we know this? So 3 days earlier, when ADT wasn't reporting much of anything, okay, it's quiescent, there are a series of computerized trading alerts derived from these algorithms of Bloomberg Automated Intelligence. And here's what they are. So on July 29th, the frequency of people who are searching for articles about ADT and reading them exceeded the most recent 30-day average. The same day, ADT rises 6.3% in trades that are 90% more numerous than the 20-day average, and when its weekly gain until that point was just 4%. ADT competitors, by the way, were closed down with an average decline of 2.6%. So you have something going exactly the opposite where the market is. Then on July 30th, ADT bonds change hands 4 times more than the 5-week average. And then the following day, ADT volume jumps to more than 5 times the 20-day average. Now, what does all this activity mean? For an investor who is informed enough to buy ADT at $7.91 a share before the BAI alerts, could sell the stock at $17.21 on the news of the Google stake in ADT. That's a return of 118%, or the equivalent of turning $1 million into $2.8 million in 4 days.
It's
now,
amazing.
Trading was significant. That's the key here.
Yeah.
Trading was significant. The 3-day average value of the shares, which was $8.55 prior to this deal's disclosure, was 8.2% greater than the 30-day average price prior to July 29th. Now, what does that tell you? That indicates investors' behavior changed in the 72 hours of trading before the news, according to this data compiled by Bloomberg.
Well, Matt, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there because we're going to run into a break. But I highly recommend everybody read this column. It is rife with good examples. And also, there's some real implications around regulation or lack thereof. Matt Winkler, thank you so much. Great to hear your voice. Co-founder, editor-in-chief emeritus of Bloomberg. Check out his column on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com. Our thanks as well to Joel Weber. Coming up, look at economics. It's Bloomberg.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading for August. We've got the Dow, a revamped Dow trading lower, S&P up barely, NASDAQ holding on to a 127-point gain, up by 1.1%. S&P's up 2 points, little changed. It's been swinging between gains and losses, up now by 0.1%. The Dow is slumping 188 points, lower by 0.7%. Most stocks declined after China threw a wrench into U.S. companies' efforts to buy TikTok. Also, investors are evaluating the outlook for global growth and central bank stimulus to counter the pandemic. The 10-year yield now 0.69%, up 8/30 seconds. Gold is up 0.3%, 19.70 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude now down by about 0.4%, $42.83 for a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude. As for the interest rate outlook, Kathy Jones is chief fixed income strategist at Charles Schwab. She was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television.
We're probably looking at the Fed on hold at least for 2-3 years here, and that'll probably anchor short rates out to about the 3 to 5 year area for quite some time. So we're not looking for much movement at the short end at all.
And again, we've got the 10-year yield now 0.69%. Warren Buffett, with more than $146 billion in cash on hand, has been struggling to find attractively priced assets at home in the U.S. Now he is looking abroad. The announcement late yesterday by Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway that it bought stakes in 5 of Japan's biggest trading companies marks one of his largest ever forays into Asia's second largest economy. Berkshire Hathaway shares, Class A shares, up now by 0.1%. Former Rite Aid CEO John Stanley will be running Walgreens Boots Alliance's U.S. business. Stanley is replacing Richard Ashworth, who left earlier this year to take a job as CEO of Tivity Health. We've got Walgreens Boots Alliance's shares down now by 1.6%. Shares of Apple and Tesla after their stock splits trading higher. Apple up 4.5%, Tesla up 11.9%. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, time to do a little Business Week economics. Excited to have with us, as we often do, Andy Brown, editorial director for Bloomberg New Economy, joins us on the phone from New York City. And Andy, your column is such a perfect companion piece to a conversation that we had last week with Peter Outwater talking about the K-shaped recovery, because I feel like you provide a lot of rich new material for that entire argument, and the headline really says it all: the rich stay home and the poor get poorer. Tell us what you set out to do.
Yeah, so, the central feature of the government's response all over the world to COVID-19 has been lockdown, right? So basically the wealthy aren't going to the office, they aren't traveling on business, and this has been absolutely devastating for workers all over the world who look after the relatively rich when they're on the road or in the office. They feed them, they make sure they're lodged and shod and clothed and groomed and otherwise pampered and fussed over. 1 in 4 American workers is actually engaged in delivering these kinds of personal services, and just suddenly that whole industry came to a standstill.
How quickly, do you have a sense yet on how quickly things like that come back? As if once we get whatever letter we are in here, K, V, W, L, shape recovery, is it a 1-for-1, or are we going to do less with these jobs?
It was interesting. I was just talking just a few minutes ago to Tom Layton, who's the CEO of Akamai.
Yeah.
They deliver a chunk of internet traffic all over the world. He just told me, he said a majority of jobs of office workers he thinks will not go back permanently, that they will stay at home for at least part of the time. Airlines, I think it's dawning on airlines that business travel is not going to snap back, that executives aren't going to go back to sort of jumping on a plane for a 1-hour meeting in Singapore or Rio or something. So this is really this is a permanent condition, and don't forget. So this is on top of the health problems that these workers, these frontline workers, have suffered. They've had the bulk of the infection. Many have died in this, and now they're suffering from this economic catastrophe. And many are women, many are minorities, and all over the world, many are migrants, internal migrants as well as international migrants. They're taking the brunt of this.
And so, how do we measure this, and how do we get our arms around the scope, Andy, especially when it comes to the poorer portion of the population?
It's huge. I mean, when you talk about working from home or jumping on a Zoom call instead of leaving on an airplane, basically this is aspects of digitization.
Yeah.
And digitization is just accelerating at an astonishing pace. I mean, Tom Layton told me internet traffic he's seen has doubled during this pandemic. And what that tells us is that whole industries are now migrating online, both everything from healthcare to manufacturing, delivery. A lot of commercial activity is now being digitized. Robots are cleaning windows. Cameras are replacing, security guards. Drones delivering packages. Cutting machines replacing meat packers. This is absolutely huge. And of course, the loss of the travel market is going to devastate whole economies. I mean, Mexico gets something like 10-15% of its GDP out of tourism. Some of these smaller island economies in Aruba or Mauritius, Seychelles, and so on. I mean, it's 80-90% of the economy. So this travel market drying up is devastating for entire communities and whole countries.
To just focus on the U.S. for a second, and then, I mean, maybe this will apply to other countries as well. Is this what has delayed the reaction function of the Phillips curve? And I wonder if the pandemic makes it so much worse because wages can't recover. Any increase you may see in wages it will come on that lower end and won't have that same kind of impact. Like, is there a connection to be made?
Yeah, I think this COVID-19 and the impact that it's had on work has just given the myth to this idea that workers were on a big roll before the pandemic. And it was true. There was something of a jobs boom going on. But the reality is that many of those jobs were low pay, low hours, low quality. They didn't have social benefits. And they were precarious. And now the precariat all over the world, as these rank and file workers are called, their livelihoods have just gone off the edge of a cliff.
So what's the policy? What's the right policy response here from the folks that you talk to, Andy, and from your own thinking about this?
Yeah, well, so when you talk to the economists, there's a lot of talk about universal basic income. I mean, this was a fringe idea and is now mainstream. I mean, Andrew Yang ran a whole campaign on this, $1,000 a month freedom dividend. Lots of talk about big infrastructure projects. I think that really is going to be crucial. Huge public works projects. Plenty of optimistic talk about, how the digital economy is going to produce jobs. People will need to service the robots. They're going to need to collect data. There's still quite a lot of human effort needed to collect the kind of feedstock data that artificial intelligence use in their algorithms. And this is all true, but this retraining story is a very complicated one. I mean, in China, as an example, something like 25% of all rural young people, and they are the ones that are doing these rank and file jobs, don't even have a secondary. Only 25% have a secondary school education. So retraining is tough. What you hear from economists like Larry Summers, former Obama economic advisors, saying, basically what you need is to give workers more power, more bargaining power, so that they can get a higher proportion of national income. The implications of that are obvious. In the U.S. as in the developing world, that this new deal.
Andy, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We really appreciate it, as always. Andy Brown, editorial director for Bloomberg New Economy. Let's get down to Washington and Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Jason. Using some of the starkest language yet, Joe Biden is slamming President Trump's handling of the violence that has erupted in cities across the country in recent weeks.
He may believe mouthing the words law and order makes him strong, but his failure to call on his own supporters to stop acting as an armed militia in this country shows how weak he is.
Biden's speech comes as unrest sweeps across the country from Portland, Oregon to Kenosha, Wisconsin, following George Floyd's death while in police custody and the paralyzing of Jacob Black following a police shooting. Well, President Trump is scheduled to visit Kenosha tomorrow, despite the governor and other state officials pushing back, saying it could incite further violence in the city. In a call with reporters today, Trump campaign staffers accused Democrats of abandoning public safety. Well, the sheriff in Kenosha County, David Betts, says many of those causing the recent violence there are outsiders.
There have been a few arrests. There's been over 200 arrests since this started. Over half of those have come from outside of Kenosha.
Betts says many of the outsiders are also posting provocative messages and using scare tactics on social media. The white St. Louis couple who tried to scare away Black Lives Matter protesters by waving guns outside their home have made their first court appearance on felony charges. Mark and Patricia McCloskey were in court briefly this morning, did not enter a plea. Their next court date is in early October. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
Nancy, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, your most read story over the past hour, Alex Steele, Governor Phil Murphy in the state of New Jersey, quote, very seriously thinking about a tax in his state on high volume trades. Not surprising that Bloomberg clients would be interested in that.
Ruh-roh.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be 25 cent per trade, and it would be on transactions made through northern New Jersey server farms in volumes of 10,000 or more annually. I mean, there's two sides to this. The first is like, this is what we're gonna see. Like, states need money. They need money to pay for stuff. If you don't get it from the feds, you got to get it from somewhere else. And even if the federal government has the same problem, like look at what potentially the Telegraph reported over in the UK over the weekend, that like higher taxes are coming, higher corporate taxes are coming. This is gonna happen. It just matters sort of where and when and how, I think.
So this is fascinating. I'm going to read a little portion of the bill here briefly. I'm quoting, there are
You're so
reportedly
crafty. You pulled
billions
that up. I'm impressed.
of financial transactions processed daily, and many of those are processed through electronic infrastructure located in New Jersey. This tax, which is on the processor but may be passed along to the purchaser or seller, can therefore potentially raise a significant amount of revenue for New Jersey, to your exact point about they need money. I mean, what's interesting about this, too, is this idea that this isn't actually going after necessarily the stockbrokers or the people who are doing these trades. This is because there is literal infrastructure, physical infrastructure. You think about the book Flash Boys, and that's what we're talking about here, is a lot of these huge server farms that are located in New Jersey, and they want their cut.
I mean, devil's advocate, like, I mean, why not? Like, if you're there, and why shouldn't you just pay like?
Well, I mean, what's also interesting,
toll, basically.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting too is you think about the disproportionate impact a lot of this electronic trading has had on the market, as witnessed by what we were hearing from Matt Winkler. It sort of all comes together in many ways. Check that out. It's your most read. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Final trading session of August. U.S. stocks are trading mixed. We've got the Dow down, S&P trading little change. It's been fluctuating. NASDAQ holding on to a gain on track for a record. Let's get all the details right now as we welcome back and head over to the First Word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. Like you said, main U.S. averages trading mixed right now, with FANG stocks outperforming once again. Dow's currently down 200 points. S&Ps are a little changed. NASDAQ is higher by 113. The U.S. 10 yield at 0.7%. WTI crude futures are in the red. Gold is trading higher by 6. Transports gained 40 points. And those FANG stocks, they're up 2.7%. Leaders to the upside in the Dow, Apple and Intel, while Disney, Boeing, and J.P. Morgan led to the downside. In other news, after splitting, Tesla soared as much as 12% to a new record high, while Apple also hit a new record high after it split. Also noting here, Amazon's drone delivery fleet hit a milestone with FAA clearance. Wrapping things up, Zoom Video and Rackspace both report after the bell. Live from the First Word breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney, and to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg type squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. If I want to try and draw big conclusions between the market and politics and everything that I'm feeling, the one person I always turn to is John Authers. He's a senior editor for Bloomberg Markets. Before Bloomberg, he spent 29 years at the Financial Times and does amazing work for us. John, you had a great piece out overnight that talked about Trump's chances in the polls, particularly also Republicans in the Senate, and how that relates to the violence that we've seen in Portland and Kenosha. And I was hoping you could kind of break it down for us.
Yes. What is interesting is that prediction markets, which are either markets where you trade futures tied to a political outcome, or straightforward sports-style spread betting markets where you're betting on a political election, both are suggesting the election has really tightened up so that it's an absolute dead heat, and that's happened basically in the last week. Nothing in the polls suggests that there should be anything as direct as that, so it suggests that a lot of the people who are putting money behind this really think that something changed last week with Kenosha. And we've seen some research, and there's been a lot of excitement today about a note out from Marko Kolonovich of J.P. Morgan, basically making that exact case that for some reason the reaction to the George Floyd killing back in the end of May was seen to help the Democrats, but what we've seen in the last few days, if the prediction markets are right, is seen to be helping Trump and the Republicans.
And what accounts for that, John? I mean, play that out for us, and why does it potentially benefit the president here?
Plainly, there's a very real possibility that the prediction markets are just wrong about this. But having said that first, I guess the key point here is the belief that the public is now prepared to blame the Democrats for what is happening, and that they see the recent cycle of violence, which included outright deaths in Kenosha and in Portland, as being much more dangerous, much less sympathetic. I personally don't quite get that. I mean, you've certainly seen that Black Lives Matter's support has peaked and declined somewhat in the last month, which is not particularly surprising, but I don't myself see that you would expect, the shocking scenes that we saw in Kenosha, both on the original police shooting and then the awful events a couple of nights later. I don't myself see quite why they are held to be helping the Republicans quite as clearly as the markets evidently evidently think.
Well, I mean, there was definitely a rhetoric that the Democrats did not address this law and order theme in the DNC, and that they should have in some capacity to acknowledge that it's happening, rather than just come back at President Trump. So that was percolating a little bit. And John, what I also thought was interesting too is that sort of the outbreaks in the Sun Belt states started to get under control, and I have to wonder, in your research that you do, like, is there a hey, we can deal with this, it may not be as bad as we thought?
Yes, no, that's the other, obviously the two big events that have happened this year in American politics have been the pandemic and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter. Yes, in the last month, the second wave, if you want to call that, the Sun Belt wave, has receded, and certainly in terms of deaths, it never got as bad as the first wave that we all lived through up here in New York. That could, if you extrapolate for another 2 months, if the virus continues to keep coming under control, a lot of the time when you look at elections, incumbents can get in a bad situation if people feel that things are getting better in the last few months before the election. That was true of Margaret Thatcher in '83 and Ronald Reagan in '84, both of whom were still overseeing very poor economies, but people felt they were definitely getting better. Right. If you have the same situation with the virus, and I guess the critical question is, can we reopen schools without opening the bottle, letting the genie or the virus out of the bottle again, then you could have a really strong sense of things are getting better as we get to election day, which plainly always helps an incumbent. And that is another belief that is out there in the markets.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a super smart column, and Alex, you teed John up so nicely. I think about him exactly the same way, that when I want to understand this nexus, he is the guy we turn to. John Author, senior editor for Bloomberg Markets, a Bloomberg opinion columnist as well. Check that out on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com, because as we were discussing with Matt Winkler, the numbers, you got to look at them. You got to look at the markets to get a sense of where things are headed.
Yeah, and the note that he referenced from J.P. Morgan basically said that the markets aren't factoring in a Trump win, and that's where we're going to start to see the disconnect, and that's the problem.
Yeah, interesting. All right, coming up, it's your favorite thing.
Oh God,
start
it's
of
so
the day.
stressful.
I know, and we're right on it. Just you're a little nervous, I know. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Dave Wilson's going to be along with his chart of the day and the accompanying song. We're going to get you to the close of trading and much more. Stick with us. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, coming up, Alex has been excited about it all day. The chart of the day, the song of the day. What's it going to be?
Well, let's just break it down for those of you who don't know me. The joke is that I know nothing about pop culture. I mean,
But I
like,
heard
you
you
gotta
did okay.
give deep.
I heard you did okay.
That is so not even true. What's the famous Led Zeppelin song?
Stairway to Heaven?
Yeah, didn't even get that one.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah. But I like musical theater. I used to be a theater director. Therefore, there you go.
All right. We're going to see if maybe, just maybe, Alex Steele can pull one out. But before we get to that, let's get to Charlie Pellet. Charlie Pellet, still riding high from Dancing Queen?
I am. You know, I listen to a lot of other ABBA songs, too. I kind of like them. But listen, a lot going on with the market today. Stairway to Heaven for NASDAQ, up 108 points right now. 11,804, up 0.9%. Yes, record there. S&P swinging between gains and losses. 28 minutes to go until we wrap up a winning month of August. We've got the S&P down by a point right now. The Dow trading lower. Revamped Dow, I might add, down 191 points lower today by just about 0.7%. Do want to begin with the airline industry. Just word from Delta Airlines in the past few minutes that it is dropping change fees for travel within the United States. Of course, over the weekend we heard from United Airlines, which got rid of its $200 change fee for domestic flights and said the beginning next year, United saying customers can fly standby for free if there is an available seat on the same day as their previously planned flight. Here's where airline stocks stand. Delta making the announcement today, down 3.2%. UAL down 3.5%. American Airlines down 3.6%. Southwest lower now by just about 2.7%. Some of the other stories that we're following, coronavirus cases have topped 6 million with outbreaks accelerating on college campuses. Arizona has recorded the smallest one-day increase in cases since May. Across the country, students have returned or are about to return to colleges and schools as parents, educators, and health professionals debate the safest way to reopen. Dr. Joshua Sharfstein is Vice Dean at the Bloomberg Johns Hopkins School of Public Health.
Kids really do need to go back to school, the young kids. So I think it's the right thing to do in areas where the caseload has come down. There's still a lot of parts of the United States where that has not happened, and reopening is not necessarily the easiest thing to do.
Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Nestle is buying Immune Therapeutics for $2.6 billion, adding a promising peanut allergy treatment to its portfolio of coffee, snacks, and water. Shares of Immune Therapeutics surging now by 171%. 10-year yield 0.70%. Gold up 0.2%, $19.69 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude retreating 0.2%, $42.88 a barrel. Again, recapping, S&P down a point, little change now, down less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week.
I will tell you that the woman, yes, it's a woman who wrote the show, also appeared in the show.
Oh, the pie thing.
Okay, work with it. The pie thing.
The waitress. The waitress?
Pies. Waitress.
The waitress, though. Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you
Okay.
go.
So who's the artist? Because this is actually the artist singing it as opposed to a cast recording.
If I look it up,
No.
Sarah Bareilles.
Congratulations.
Now, to be fair, the staff told me that, but I knew it was the waitress, and I got there eventually. And I also looked it up.
Well, yeah, Carol is known for doing that. So,
Yeah.
Alex, you're just following in a grand tradition.
Exactly. Well done, Dave. You know, he was trying so hard for you there, Alex.
I owe you a lot right now, Dave
There you go.
Wilson. A
All right.
lot.
So how does it relate
It's
to
all
the
about
chart?
changes. The
There you
chart's
go.
all about changes. 3 stocks go into the Dow Jones Industrial Average, 3 come out. So, you know, I went and looked back to June 2018, the last time you saw that kind of a change. That's when Walgreens Boots Alliance went in and General Electric came out. Now, there have been some other modifications since then, but they tie into takeovers, spin-offs, that sort of thing. That was the last time you actually had one company go in and another go out, and they were unrelated. So when you run the numbers going back, and it's a bit more than 2 years, June 2018, you find out that the 3 stocks that went in the Dow did better than the 3 stocks that came out. And Salesforce.com clearly is the standout of the group, you know, because its shares more than doubled. A lot of that tied into the earnings report they had last week, which went over really well. Stock took off in response to that. But, you know, you take a look at the other new entrants to the Dow, Amgen and Honeywell International, and their shares weren't up as much, but they were up more than Pfizer, which was the only one of the 3 companies to come out of the Dow that actually managed to gain in those 2+ years. Again, the others, ExxonMobil, whose shares took quite the beating.
Oh, man.
And Raytheon Technologies, which was United Technologies. Then they did their deals, spun off Carrier air conditioners, Otis elevators. And, you know, look, I mean, it's just a way to kind of keep score and maybe understand why these stocks went in and these other stocks came out. Because, you know, as much as Apple's 4-for-1 stock split reduced that company's value and certainly would have a negative effect on the Dow, at least they tried to compensate for that, not only in the companies they chose, you know, in the industry groups they represented, but also in stock performance. If you want to know more, folks, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
All right, Dave Wilson. That was very well done and fun
So
to
well
watch,
done.
I have to say. Fun to be a part of. All right, Dave Wilson will be back with us in just a little bit after the close of trading with his stock of the day. Alex, so what was the last great show you did see? It was a few years ago.
I actually have to say, I did sneak out to the theater once, and I saw Moulin Rouge. My husband took me last year for our anniversary, and I was like, ugh, okay. I didn't like the movie. I was like, whatever. I swear to you, it was one of the best shows I've seen. It has the best Act 2 opening I've ever seen in musical theater.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have to say, Chris Rouser, who, as you know, runs Pursuits for us over on the Business Week side, he wrote about Moulin Rouge and came on our Bloomberg Business Week television show to talk about it back in the day before it opened. And he absolutely raved about that show.
Yeah, legit blew me away.
And I think he was similarly skeptical coming in. That's like, oh, yeah, I mean, the movie's a little odd. It was Baz Luhrmann, right? The movie?
Yeah, it was Baz Luhrmann. But the way the music is strung together, and it's nice to hear people who can actually sing them. It bugs me to no end when you have people like Nicole Kidman, who like is not a performer and not a singer in that way, play those roles. I know I get some hate for that sometimes, but like they were real musical theater people. I mean, it was amazing. It was so well done. And I'm not a fan of that. It's kind of like make a movie and turn it into theater kind of thing.
Right. So you're not rushing to see Frozen?
Not so well. No, for so many different reasons.
I
don't think I've ever seen. Have I? I think the only one I've seen was
Lion
The Producers that went from. Like,
you didn't see Lion King?
I didn't. No, same kind of. Although I do.
Lion King's pretty amazing.
Julie Taymor is really amazing.
Yeah.
So I would see it for her, but not for the transplant.
So how worried are you about Broadway?
Oh, well, I mean, my husband's a playwright, and he also licenses plays. So we're pretty worried in the Pospastille house. His name is Pospastille. It very, very much. and they're not necessarily quick to change there. Like Broadway doesn't use a lot of technology, theater doesn't necessarily use a lot of technology, and you have to move fast so you can still put on stuff, and it's going to be slow for them.
Yeah, we've had the president of the Broadway League on this program a couple times, Charlotte St. Martin, and the economics just don't work.
No, they don't. And how do they work right now?
Yeah, and I think that it speaks to this big notion of how New York City may be changing, and I don't know. I mean, I still think that people will be coming back, tourists and others will be coming back, and we had that discussion about business travel. I do think that's going to be down dramatically. Andy Brown mentioned that. I actually don't think leisure travel will be affected quite as much. I think once there's a vaccine, I think people will want to travel.
But will you travel and then want to sit in a theater with 800 other people having paid like $500 a ticket? That I don't know. And there's also the risk for the actual performer. So well, not right now, but I think I think once there's some measure of safety, some sort of like vaccine world, right? Yeah, maybe, but that's going to take a while, and in the meantime, you have to stay alive,
right?
And that's going to be really, really tricky. So you have to move towards like a secure platform for maybe streaming a live show, so you can get like maybe 8 people on stage there, like you do with sports. But then you need to have some kind of secure way of streaming it, so you can still charge people, and it can't be piloted. So I think that that's kind of what is in the conversation right now, and that would be more like an off-Broadway kind of thing than a full-on Broadway. You really wouldn't do a musical like that.
Right.
But it's a very old industry that's very slow to change, to be perfectly honest. And like it's hard to do it, and there's a lot of resistance.
Well, and as you know better than I do, and certainly your husband knows, like the economics are in part, I don't want to say held hostage, but complicated by all the unions and all the different constituencies. And that was one of the things that Charlotte St. Martin has repeatedly said is you can't do a 50% full theater because the fixed cost owing to the complexity of labor arrangements and things like that just don't work.
But even with the unions as well, like you kind of want the unions now because they're going to look out for you, and it's not very safe to go back. I've heard that anecdotally from some actor buddies, and that's a little dicey too, that they'll take the work.
There you go. All right. Much more ahead, including the close of trading. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Just getting word now that American Airlines has joined rivals such as Delta and United in dropping that $200 ticket change fee. We've got 13 minutes to go until we wrap up the trading month of August. Most stocks are lower after China threw a wrench into U.S. companies' efforts to buy TikTok. Also, investors are evaluating the outlook for global growth and central bank stimulus to counter the pandemic. Here's where we stand. The S&P 500 index now up 5 points, a gain of about 0.2%, but the Dow is down 118 points, lower by 0.4. NASDAQ up 132, up by 1.1%. 10-year up 0.3%, the yield 0.70%. Gold up 0.3%, 1970 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3, 42.85 a barrel. Apple, Tesla trading at records after a split. We've got Apple up 4.4%, Tesla up now by 12.5%. Recapping, S&P up 5, up 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
And it is time for the Drive to the Close. Really fortunate to have back with us our pal Hillary Kramer, President and Chief Investment Officer of A&G Capital Research. Also the author of a terrific book, Game Changer Investing, How to Profit from Tomorrow's Billion-Dollar Trends. She joins us on the phone from New Jersey. Hillary, how are you? It's been a while.
Yes, Jason, it has been a while, and I am stunned, as is my team, that the market NASDAQ continues to rise, and we are just, kind of beside ourselves, thinking that Tesla could be up more than 10% simply because it starts, trading on a split-adjusted basis, and Apple up 4%. It's just really kind of incredible. But
so how do you make
great.
how do you make sense of that? I mean, how do you sort of break it down? Because you're incredibly analytical, and I know you have a team that is like you. So how do you explain it?
Well, what we see is that it's just euphoria. It's simply you just have so much momentum in the market, and Apple just keeps going up. No one wants to miss it. I mean, it's kind of a herd mentality if there has ever been one. And the same with Tesla. And for those that don't realize, Tesla is up 1,010% in the last 52 weeks. I mean, that's kind of amazing.
My gosh.
These kind of numbers. Apple is only up, only 152% in the last 52 weeks. Of course, if you bought at the wrong time or the right time, you're a millionaire or you lost. But we really think that there's just also been so much liquidity in the market, and it's just been an easy money environment that has just forced people to not realize that this can end so badly, and it can be so quick, and they can get burned. And what's going to do it? Anything, and it's when it happens, it'll be so fast. No one can really get out quick enough.
But I guess we saw that, right? Like we saw the worst case scenario unfold in March with the pandemic and the sell-off. And it didn't happen, and it didn't stay because of the swift government action and the Fed's government action as well, which begs the question, how can you not buy Apple? How can you not buy Tesla? How can you not buy the FANGs?
Well, because the growth just couldn't possibly keep up, Alex. And I know you're asking it rhetorically on some level, I think, but the growth could never possibly keep up with the stock price. Stock prices are based on growth, and they're based on expectations of growth in the future. And right now, we are talking about major layoffs, bankruptcies, all one has to do is go to an airport, and see 70% decrease in travel traffic. All you have to do is go to a car dealership, and whatever's on that sticker is meaningless today. It's about moving those vehicles, and the market is looking for any good news. Like, for example, there could be a phase one trade deal between the U.S. and China, right? And that lifts the market today. Or what about the possible emergency allowance for coronavirus vaccine even before phase 3 is finished? I don't know. The market thinks that is really good news.
And so what about the consumer, Hillary? Because I feel like so much of what investors are buying into is this notion of there will be a vaccine, consumers will get back to spending, and everything's going to be okay, at least in some of those consumer names. Do you buy that?
No, the consumer isn't going to keep buying. There's just been a lot of money because of I'll be honest, it's the $600 that went every single week to not just furloughed and laid off employees that have W-2s, but those that work for themselves and 1099s. So we had checks going up for unemployment. We had the $600 a week, and now we're in a total, absolute stalemate. You're talking $1.2 trillion the White House is willing to spend on this phase 5 of the coronavirus allowance of money that's going to go out, and versus now, Pelosi's down at, I think, $3.3 trillion, from $5 trillion. There's a massive, I mean, you could drive, major trucks through that differential. So that could be the spark that's the problem. We also have, we're going to know what the unemployment rate is on Friday, but I'm guessing it's going to drop below 10%. And that's because, the numbers are going to get seasonally adjusted. And then that's going to be a reason for everyone to have an emergency meeting and some money will be out there. But if a government the United States spent $3.5 trillion so far on just relief to corporations, relief to individuals, and I know it was needed by so many. Don't get me wrong, of course it was needed, but that money was spent. And now there might not be anything left. And if those rates go up to 10 years at 0.7, then houses, the people have already bought as many houses as they're going to buy. They've already done the work they want to do on their home. And who am I to speculate on any kind of second wave of coronavirus? But the kids, think about what's going on at the colleges.
Right.
And they're closing down for 2 weeks here or a week here. Think about what happens with only a few days left before the majority of K through 12 returns to school across this country, and all bets are off if it turns out that they end up having to stay home. And the companies in New York have begged de Blasio to make sure that the kids go back to school, but he also has a teachers union, de Blasio, our mayor. He also has a teachers union that's saying you've got to watch out for our safety and our health.
Yeah.
So, you have stalemates across the board here, and then you have these stocks like Illinois Tool Works, and that I love that is just sort of, just has, up 39% on the year, 52 weeks, or I still love Valvoline. People still need to put oil in their car. You've heard me talk about these.
Right, and we didn't even and we have to let you go, and we didn't even get to talk about Chewy, which is our favorite thing. Hillary Kramer, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. President and Chief Investment Officer at A&G Capital Research, author of Game Changer Investing, How to Profit from Tomorrow's Billion-Dollar Trends. Well, Alex Steele, we're going to get to the close of trading here in just a minute.
Happy end of August, yes.
Happy end of August. NASDAQ continuing to drive higher, as Hillary Kramer said at the top. It's up 31%, almost 32% for the year. Whoa, as Carol Masser would say. The close, it's coming up next. Stick with us. It's Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. There you have it. Sound of the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange, and it is on to the trading month of September as we await the latest numbers out of work from home, darling Zoom Video Communications. It was an update today for the NASDAQ Composite Index, not just an update, another record up 79 points, up 0.7%. NASDAQ ending the day at 11,775. S&P ending the trading month of August down 8 points at 34.99, close to a record lower by 0.2%. Dow Jones Industrial Average down 230 points, lower by 0.8%. 10-year up 3/30 seconds with a yield of 0.71%. Gold advanced 0.2%. 19.68 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3%. 42.83 a barrel. We did see new records today for Apple and Tesla, even after their stock split. So what, if anything, might that tell us about the market? That question for Hillary Kramer, President and Chief Investment Officer at A&G Capital, who was our guest moments ago, right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
What we see is that it's just euphoria. It's simply, you just have so much momentum in the market, and Apple just keeps going up. No one wants to miss it. I mean, it's kind of a herd mentality if there has ever been one, and the same with Tesla.
Apple and Tesla both reaching records today on that split-adjusted basis. Apple shares up 3.4%. Tesla surging today by 12.5%. Some of the other stocks that saw big moves today: Nestle buying Immune Therapeutics for $2.6 billion. Shares surged by 1.7%. Also getting a big jump today, GameStop, an investment firm managed by the co-founder of Chewy.com, has acquired a stake in the troubled video game retailer. GameStop up 23.9%. S&P down 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Move around. Motion creates the motion.
I feel the earth move under my feet.
You move like they do. I've never seen anyone move that fast.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Company's called Movers and Shakers. They cost a little more, but that name cracked me up.
Bloomberg Business Week, Movers and Shakers, with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
And it is time for your movers and shakers, your winners and losers here on this Monday, this last day of August before we get into the fall, at least in spirit, if not technically. Let's take a look at what the S&P did today. Definitely on the losing side, 364 names down, 140 up, one unchanged, and the mood was one of not a whole lot of direction, Alex Steele, but we did see some individual names. Tesla and Apple, you heard Charlie Pellet say, hitting records. Splitsville.
Yeah, and Tesla's a fun one because there's a fun stat that goes with it. This made Elon Musk the third richest person in the world. He just surpassed Facebook Mark Zuckerberg on Monday as you had this unrelenting rally in Tesla. So there you go. He's now worth like $112 billion.
Yeah. He's a centibillionaire.
Take a look at that one. Yeah. So that's just the fun thing on Tesla.
Musk over Zuck is what that's who he overtook. Yeah, I mean, listen, you look at those top four names, even with Zuckerberg down to 4. It's all tech. The top 4, all tech. And maybe not surprisingly, given what we've seen the NASDAQ do this year.
Right, and I also want to point out that one of the best performing stocks in the S&P is tech, but not like a sexy Tesla. It's Advanced Micro Devices.
Yes.
They got some really good reviews on a new processor, and so there's lots of optimism now in the market that they're going to gain some market shares in PCs because of it. And they also designed chips for Sony and Microsoft games consoles that are also being refreshed. That's like a fundamental, reason why AMD would also be up despite the whole tech craze.
Right. Well, and what we've seen with AMD, as I'm sure you've watched as well, because I believe you spent some time with some of the top executives at both of the both rivals, AMD and Intel. I mean, they are just feasting on Intel right now.
Yeah.
I mean, Intel has just found new and different ways to stumble over the past over the course of the past year, and AMD really taking advantage of that. And also, as you mentioned, launching a specific competitor to NVIDIA, which has surpassed Intel as the world's biggest chip maker. So definitely keeping an eye on that. Airlines, they are in the news in part because they are having to do whatever they can to keep their customers. Delta today following United in dropping those change fees. And I have to say, and the stocks punished for that reason, Delta down almost 3.5%. I have to say, as a consumer, that always annoyed me. You know, even like traveling for business or traveling for work or for leisure, you call and be like, hey, I just need to take a different flight that day. They're like, oh, okay, well, there's not really a price change, but you are going to have to pay $200 just cause.
Yeah, it's like, thanks. But it's also just sort of the new realization that we're in a different world now when it comes to airline travel, and they need to get quick on how to retain customers in some capacity. Zoom is out, so I just wanted to hit that with you real quick. So Zoom Video, second quarter, I mean, from the numbers, it looks like they absolutely crushed it, and they upgraded their revenue and earnings estimates for the full year, which just are huge upgrades. They're looking to make like $2.39 billion on the top end for full year revenue and $2.47 on adjusted EPS basis. Big, big numbers.
Yeah, just to put that fiscal year revenue forecast in perspective, as you said, the top end of the range now $2.39 billion. It had been $1.8 billion. Wow. That is bananas in many ways. We are living in a Zoom world, that's for sure. Let's see what the stock is doing. It is up, not surprisingly, about 4.5%, 5%. So we will dig into that a little bit later on this hour, break down what those numbers mean. I mean, we know that Zoom has been at the core of so many work from home lives. Let's take a quick look at volatility. The VIX, volatility up quite a bit today, 15%, closing at 26.47. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Dave, you're up.
Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, where are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for the price on Wilson.
Open up the door, it's Dave!
Who?
Dave!
Hey, Mr. Wilson!
Hey, Mr. Wilson, Dave Wilson back with us with your stock of the day. What you got?
I got a stock that Charlie Pellet actually mentioned a few moments ago, GameStop. It's a retailer of video games, game consoles, and related items. The company was founded in 1984, went public in 2002. The ticker is GME. GameStop's shares peaked in 2007. They've fallen every year since 2014 as the business has moved online. Game makers are increasingly cutting out the company by offering subscriptions and game downloads themselves. Now, GameStop has been down as much as 58% this year. The shares set a record low in early April, yet they're now higher for 2020, and a big reason for the reversal was disclosed today. As Charlie mentioned, GameStop has a new investor in Ryan Cohen, a co-founder of online pet store Chewy.com. Cohen and his RC Ventures bought 5.8 million shares. That's a 9% stake. He's now GameStop's third largest shareholder behind fund managers BlackRock and Fidelity. And in buying into GameStop, Cohen followed the lead of Michael Burry, featured in Michael Lewis's bestseller, The Big Short. Burry Cyan Asset Management held 2.75 million shares at the end of June. Now, the value of their holdings jumped today as GameStop rose to its highest price in 14 months. You know, the shares, well, they had quite the day, no question. GameStop closing with a gain. And as soon as my Bloomberg terminal tells me, there we go, almost 24%.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big jump. People have video games. I don't personally. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Alex Steele, not a big gamer.
I like board games.
And there you have it, folks.
As I said it, I was like, wow, that sounds so uncool.
Yeah. You made it even less cool than I was thinking you might. Well done. Dave Wilson, thank you so much. We'll catch up with you tomorrow for your insights, your chart, and your stock. In the meantime, let's get some world and national headlines. For that, we head over to Mark Mills. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Jason. Joe Biden delivered an impassioned rebuttal Monday to Donald Trump's convention acceptance speech that portrayed him as a socialist who is soft on crime. Speaking in Pittsburgh, Biden also unleashed a barrage of attacks on the president, accusing him of fomenting violence across the country this summer.
This is a sitting president of the United States of America. He's supposed to be protecting his country, but instead he's rooting for chaos and violence.
At the White House, Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany attacked Democrats over violent demonstrations in the cities.
All of these cities are Democrat-run. All of these cities have experienced anarchy, violence, and destruction in recent days, the opposite of a peaceful protest.
An Israeli airplane crossed through Saudi Arabian airspace for the first time on Monday as it carried a delegation of Israeli and American officials to a historic round of peace talks in the United Arab Emirates. National Intelligence Chief Robert O'Brien described the significance of the Israeli-UAE talks.
These two great nations are beginning the process of exchanging ambassadors and are cooperating in a broad range of fields, including finance, education, healthcare, trade, and security.
New York City's indoor dining will remain shut as neighboring New Jersey is set to open on Friday, with the state's movie theaters as well. At a news conference, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy said the reopening will come with strong limits, which will be strictly enforced.
And masks are required to be worn at all times in the theater unless you're pulling it down to put away a handful of popcorn.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks, Mark, so much. I appreciate it. And Alex, let's pick up right where he left off, which is New Jersey indoor dining and theaters, movie theaters set to open. New York City still saying, no, we're not ready yet. What do you make of that? I feel like this is the discussion that we have in any socially distant social conversation is, what are you willing to do?
Yeah.
And I think the answer varies depending on who you're talking to, what your situation is, right?
I just love Phil Murphy being like, put your mask on unless you're eating popcorn.
Yeah.
It's like,
unless you're like stuffing your pie hole with some popcorn.
But what if you're doing that for the full 2 hours and you're not really wearing your mask? But it all goes back. Yeah, go ahead.
That's exactly what came up in a conversation that we were having about this weekend, because I love going to the movies. I'm in no hurry to go back to the movies right now because of that exact rule, because concession stands are going to be open, in part because that's the way that they make a lot of their money. But listen, people are eating, you're right, they're like popping popcorn into their mouth and eating jujubes or whatever the kids are eating these days. Probably not jujubes.
What?
Yeah.
There's like the jimmies. Anyway, but I think that this is...
Listen, you said board games, so you need to...
I did say board, but they're cool board games like Pandemic and Catan. Anyway, but I think you raise a really good point in that, and it's going to get colder. So it's like we have 6 to 8 weeks of eating outdoors until restaurants need to be able to figure out what to do, and until, Cuomo here has to figure out what to do if you can't go inside. It's a ventilation thing. Even if you're at 25% capacity, if you're indoor, like we know, being indoors can be dangerous, which is the whole point behind why schools are struggling to reopen with kids. So how does it make a difference? You need the ventilation. If you don't have it, I don't know how it's okay.
Well, and one of the things that Elise Young and Keisha Kluge's story says on the Bloomberg is that Murphy is saying you got to have the windows open, or you have to have the air conditioning basically set to pull in fresh air. I mean, okay, I'm a little skeptical that.
And like, how are you gonna figure that out?
Yeah,
when you go in.
Exactly. All right, much more to come. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Big revenue numbers, a beat, in fact, out of Zoom Video Communications. Second quarter revenue, $663.5 million. Estimates there, $500 million. Also sees third quarter revenue in the range of $685 to $690 million. Estimates, $492.8 million. Shares of Zoom Video Communications up now by just about 6%. Most stocks fell today, final trading day of August. This after China threw a wrench into U.S. companies' efforts to buy TikTok. A jump in Apple powered the NASDAQ 100 to a record. Here are the finishing numbers today with the S&P 500 index down 7 points, a drop there of 0.2%. NASDAQ up 79, up 0.7%. The Dow down 228, actually down 223.8. That was a decline today of 0.8%. 10-year up 5/32 with a yield of 0.70%. Gold up 0.2%, $19.69 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, $42.75 a barrel. So again, to recap and clarify, NASDAQ up 0.7%, S&P down 7, a drop there of 0.2%, the Dow down 223, a drop there of 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, certainly a headline that caught just about everybody's attention in the investing world had to do with Uncle Warren Buffett, and Berkshire Hathaway. $6 billion they are betting, Alex Steele, on Japanese trading firms. Wait, what? Did not see that one coming necessarily, but here to make us a lot smarter about this is Kat Chiglinski, finance reporter for Bloomberg. She follows all things Buffett. She joins us on the phone from Queens. So, Kat, break this down for us, because everybody obviously watches very closely what Berkshire and Buffett do. What do folks make of this move?
Well, it definitely came as a surprise to folks. I mean, Buffett, while he's dabbled in some international investments, he's really stuck more closely to home, taking bets on Apple and Bank of America. But this really signals that Berkshire's willing to spend money overseas. And, he went for companies that, while they, have been around for many years, they're in a much better space. And, they have big competitive moats. And so I think this, while being kind of a surprising move, it ends up being quite logical for Berkshire.
Right, let's dig into that a little bit, because if you take a look at, say, the cash flow of these companies, like 10 years ago, they weren't returning this kind of cash, and now they are. They cleaned up their businesses, they really focused on things like return on equity, and that really helped them appeal to value investors. Agreed. And, one of our colleagues, Stephen, brought up the point that sometimes, these companies are so broad that the lack of focus has, been a criticism of them. But for Berkshire, that's actually kind of nice. A lot of these trading companies can, they have footholds in many different energy industries, from energy and commodities. Some even operate hospitals and sell tires. But Berkshire sort of is that in a way, and I think it makes it kind of a logical fit.
And so how much of this is a bet, Kat, on Japan in some ways? Because it's not just one firm, it's a series of them, or a cohort of them. What does it say about the future of the country, or at least its financial footing?
Well, I think this is pretty interesting, because Berkshire actually was building these stakes over the past year. So he's building them both pre-coronavirus and while we've been, dealing with this pandemic. And I think that really underscores that he's been doing a lot of research on these companies and this market. And I think he wouldn't have gotten into it if he had major concerns about the market, because these companies are so, wide-ranging in terms of the industries that they're in. I mean, I think it, ends up indicating that he's quite bullish on it.
Well, and Jason, to your point, I mean, if you look at Abenomics, right, the three arrows, it's, monetary policy, fiscal consolidation, and then growth and sort of some structural reforms, right? Well, we see what happened with monetary policy and fiscal consolidation and reversing some of the things like those tax hikes and et cetera. And I feel like maybe this is also a vote of confidence in that third arrow, in that structural reform growth strategy in some capacity. As I mentioned, the company is getting rid of their debt and their leverage and really focusing on things like return on equities.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kat, too, to pick up on something that Alex just said, that Abenomics is about to be without Abe in some ways, and obviously the political future, if not uncertain, is at least not as clear as it once was with their longest-serving premier stepping down. But clearly, Buffett not concerned about that either.
Yeah, I mean, I think if he would have been concerned, he might have been a bit more careful about announcing it just recently. So I think it is a good sign. And, you know, he mentioned in his quote in the statement that he's looking forward to the joint ventures that these companies are involved with, and that he hopes in the future that there may be more opportunities of mutual benefit. And I think that really indicates that he's sticking with these for a long term, and he really sees potential for kind of a big tie between him and these companies in this economy.
Well, and just one thing to point out that I think is important, and you guys do a nice job of this in the story, that the trading houses, and I'm reading your nice work here, supply the resource-poor nation with everything from natural gas to noodles, and have spent the last few decades transforming the conglomerates that hold equity stakes in hundreds of companies around the world. So I think that's an important element of this too, Alex.
Yeah, and it's sort of, as Kat was saying, illustrative of what Berkshire Hathaway has really become. Yeah. What's next? What's he going to buy?
I think that'll be the next surprise, right? You know, at least this announcement really underscores the fact that while Buffett is stuck close to home, he's willing to venture abroad, and therefore that really expands the opportunity set that Berkshire is looking at. And I think that's really what investors are looking for. I mean, Berkshire has a record $147 billion in cash, and they've really struggled to find good opportunities in the U.S. And so I think if you're a Berkshire investor, if you're bullish on the stock, I think this is a big reassurance that Berkshire is not limiting its opportunity set, that it really is willing to put in the research when it comes to other markets.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Kat Chiglinski, thank you so much, finance reporter for Bloomberg, joining us on the phone from Queens, looking after all things Berkshire. And for those of you listening in New York and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week continues. If you're listening on Bloomberg 99.1 in D.C., Sound On with Kevin Cirilli. That is coming up next. And Uncle Warren turning 90 over the weekend.
Yeah, happy birthday. That's really impressive.
Happy birthday. Here's $6 billion of a Japanese company.
And I was asking Kat earlier on TV, I was like, how much of this was really Warren, right? And she's like, felt like it was a lot of it. That he was really, spearheading this. So he's still, active in a lot of this. It's impressive.
Yeah, it is absolutely impressive. And listen, it's one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg for a reason, because everybody looks to what he's doing, and especially when he does something that's a little bit eyebrow-raising to some extent. And I have to think that there are a lot of analysts up and down Wall Street today getting a lot smarter about Japanese trading firms. I think that's fair to say. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
And coming up, we are going to check in on Zoom. They really had a big quarter, and maybe more importantly, looked ahead to an even bigger rest of the year to come. So we're going to dig into that in just a minute. But first, Charlie Pellet, he's got an update on those headlines after the close. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Jason Kelly. Got to begin with Zoom Video Communications. I know you guys will have more on the story, but I can't wait to tell this one. We've got shares up now by just about 8% after hours. Zoom Video Communications raising its annual revenue forecast, topping analyst estimates, and signaling that the company is confident that businesses and consumers will continue to flock to the video meeting service. Again, we'll have more on Zoom Video Communications coming up in just a moment right here on Bloomberg Business Week. First day of trading post-split for two high-flying stocks. What a day for Apple and Tesla, both ending the Monday session at records. Dan Ives is with Wedbush Securities.
So Apple and Tesla a 5-for-1 stock split, Apple a 4-for-1. So no investors should get panicked when they see a stock down 80%. You know, and look, in terms of the stock splits, I think it was the right move at the right time, because these are companies, they're in a position of strength given the parabolic moves you see in the stocks. And I think this could be even another catalyst going forward, especially as more retail momentum in the likes of Tesla and Apple.
And again, both Apple and Tesla at records. Apple up today by 3.4%, bringing its year-to-date gain to 75.8%. Tesla surging another 12.5%, bringing its year-to-date gain to 495.6%. Elon Musk is now the third richest person in the world, at least for the time being. Musk passed Facebook co-founder Mark Zuckerberg. The shares of Tesla continued their unrelenting rally. Speaking of unrelenting rallies, NASDAQ up again today, record there. NASDAQ 100 index also at a record. NASDAQ up 79 points today, up 0.7%. The S&P was down 8, a drop there of 0.2%. The Dow tumbled 223, down 0.8%. 10-year up 5/30 seconds with a yield of 0.70%. Gold up 0.2%. 1968 the ounce, in West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%. 42.79 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, let's check in on Zoom with Scott Kessler, Global Sector Lead of Technology, Media, and Telecommunications for Third Bridge. He joins us on the phone. So, Scott, what a quarter. Wow. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, pretty impressive, right? I mean, there are a lot of different numbers that I could kind of talk about here, but the one that's most obvious is just the top line growth. I think they saw 355% growth, and perhaps more notably in some respects, I mean, they're talking about FY21 revenues that are 50% higher, roughly, than the consensus estimate. So they're really just seizing upon the opportunity and executing well, and that seems evident in what they're communicating at this point.
Did we learn about sort of, I guess what I'm struck by is the visibility that they seem to have for the full year, and then I wonder what they're going to say about 2021, 2022, when there is going to be a vaccine and people presumably do get back to work. I wonder how sustainable that kind of real growth is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, Alex. I mean, I think one of the ways to think about Zoom at this point is just look at the growth in a number of different dimensions. So they're talking about growth in FY21 that's going to be roughly 4 times the growth in FY20. Wow. That was just earlier this year. And we're not talking about, de minimis revenues. I mean, we're talking about 600 million plus in revenues in FY20, and I think their guidance, indicated well over 2 billion in revenue. They talked about 2.37 to 2.39 billion in revenues for FY21. So, I've said this has really become the company of the coronavirus lockdowns in many respects. I think a lot of people had never heard of Zoom as of the end of last year, and now everyone's using it all the time.
And so what do you make of the competitive landscape, given that, obviously it's become and I say this as someone who has a cold, sort of a Kleenex type brand at this
That's all I can
point.
think about right
That
now.
even if you are not getting on a Zoom, an actual Zoom, if it's a Google Meet or if it's a WebEx, people sort of use Zoom almost interchangeably. Do they have enough of a competitive advantage at this point, or who are they most worried about, Scott?
Yeah. So, Jason, time will tell, obviously. I mean, based on conversations that we're having, two things worth keeping in mind. Number one, the market that they're looking to pursue at this point could be a $200 to $300 billion market. So there's enough revenue to go around. But I think by some accounts, their most significant competitor is Microsoft with Teams and with Skype and with the installed base of enterprises and with the continuing push to do a variety of different types of communication solutions for businesses and individuals. However, as you pointed out, it does seem like Zoom has a superior solution, whether it's cost, whether it's ease of use, or whether it's reliability, although that has been called into question given the outage last week.
Yeah. Can I ask a quick question? And this is self-serving because I'm speaking to the CFO tomorrow on Bloomberg Television. Shameless plug. What's the number one question I should ask?
I think the question that Jason just asked is a good question around competition, but I think also how important is it to win more business with kind of the, Fortune 1000, the Fortune 100, the biggest enterprises, and what are the obstacles? And I would imagine one of the obstacles is features and functionality that cater not just to the individual user, the student looking to get onto a class call, or individuals that are looking to talk about, some type of sales opportunity. We're talking about, enterprises that have tens of thousands of employees, and how do they provide the solutions that those folks need to kind of be most productive and for those companies to make those kinds of big commitments.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a name that we will continue to watch. We really appreciate your instant insight on it. Scott Kessler, Global Sector Lead of Technology, Media, and Telecommunications over at Third Bridge. He joins us on the phone to talk a little bit about Zoom. And, man, this is a company, Alex, that it's up. This is before the close. As of the close, up 378%. It's up another 10%, give or take, here in aftermarket trading. And it is the pandemic stock in many ways.
I guess also it closed at a record, actually, so you can only imagine it probably open a record tomorrow. There's also, though, the question of security.
Yes.
And how do you guarantee that? It's going to be really hard to sign up more of these big enterprises with what Scott was talking about if you can't provide the right kind of security. So I wonder how they have to tackle that and how quickly they have to tackle that when every other big company like a Microsoft is in this space too.
Yeah, and that's going to be what that is going to be what they're going to bring to the table, and certainly that is going to be what they say they can do that Zoom, maybe, as you say, has struggled with. All right, well, we'll keep an eye on that stock tomorrow, that is for sure. Let's get to Mark Mills now for World and National Headlines. Hey, Mark.
Hello, Jason and Alex. Declaring President Donald Trump a toxic presence, Democrat Joe Biden campaigned in Pittsburgh, blaming Trump for fomenting the divide that's sparking urban violence, while also condemning the rioting in recent protests.
Rioting is not protesting. Looting is not protesting. None of this is protesting. It's lawlessness, plain and simple.
President Trump reacted to Biden on Twitter, saying, "To me, he's blaming the police far more than he's blaming the rioters, anarchists, agitators, and looters." President Trump will travel to Kenosha, Wisconsin on Tuesday. As of now, he has no plans to meet with the family of Jacob Blake, who was shot while in police custody. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany.
Currently, the plans are to meet with local law enforcement and some business owners, and he'll survey the damage. But there will be more detailed plans forthcoming that are announced.
Rapper Kanye West has made the presidential ballot in Iowa. New York's indoor dining will remain shut as neighboring New Jersey's is set to reopen starting Friday, along with the state's movie theaters. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is waiting to see what develops with the coronavirus in the coming weeks.
Labor Day, we'll see more people going back to school. That is a factor we have to watch. We're coming into the fall. Flu season is a factor that we have to watch.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says the numbers in his state are improving.
The number of COVID-positive patients that are currently hospitalized is down nearly 60% statewide from our July peak.
U.S. coronavirus cases top 6 million with outbreaks accelerating on college campuses. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on quick take by Bloomberg. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills. This is Bloomberg.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Appreciate it. Alex Steele, let's talk about Las Vegas. This is, yeah, I tell you, Joe Mysak is just one of these kind of Bloomberg treasures in many ways, because he finds these
Really
muni
great
stories that you're like, wait, what? And this is great. The Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority plans to vote on Tuesday to buy the city's monorail, one of the municipal bond market's spectacular smash-ups.
This is the best one. The monorail cost $650 million, right?
Yeah.
But the authority can buy it for less than 25. That's just a little more than the train actually made in 2019. What it does say to me, though, is something that we talked about with New Jersey and potentially looking at a trade tax. Like if you're trading on their infrastructure system, then you have to pay like 25 cents a trade. Is that, you know, states need money. They don't have money. So then they need to turn to either sort of private sector or these authorities to kind of come in and provide the cash. I think we're going to see this like all over the place.
Yeah, I think so too. And listen, I think Vegas is in a, not surprisingly, given everything that's going on in the world, a little bit of an existential crisis. You do see some tourism picking up, but the thing that I would be worried about if I were long Vegas or somehow invested in Vegas is the convention and trade show business, because I just don't see that coming back anytime soon, or maybe ever, to the level that it was. Like even the idea that CES, the big electronic show, that's going to be virtual this year. I mean, that is hundreds of thousands of people who won't be in Vegas in January.
Right.
Full stop.
No, 100%. And just to back you up on that, in this report, they say that in July, that was the first full month after Las Vegas reopened, the number of visitors was 61% of what it was for the same month last year. So, like, I mean, it's really rough. MGM's laying off people. Like, to your point, 100%.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Mixed Monday. It is on to the trading month of September. NASDAQ ends the month at a record up 79 points today, up by 0.7%. NASDAQ 100 index also at a record. The Dow, though, fell 223 points, down 0.8%. A revamped Dow today. S&P lower by 7, a drop there of 0.2%. 10-year up 4/32 with a yield of 0.70%. Gold up $4 the ounce, higher by 0.2% at $19.69. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%, $42.81 a barrel. Post split today, we did see Apple climbing to a record, up another 3.4%. Tesla also at a record, up another 12.5%. After ours, we heard from Zoom Video Communications. Third quarter revenue beat, third quarter raising its outlook in terms of revenue there. Second quarter beat, and we've got Zoom Video Communication shares up now by more than 9%. Recapping, equities mixed with the S&P down 7, down 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Well, in a normal world, Carol Massar and I would be prepping later this week to head out to Queens and to sit in the shadow of Arthur Ashe Stadium for this year's U.S. Open. Not to be this year. They are playing. It is off and running today, but no fans, and it's a very different tournament. Earlier today, USTA CEO Michael Dowse, he was a guest on Bloomberg Surveillance to talk about some of the innovations. So let's hear about that because we've got the perfect guest to tell us more about it. Check it out.
Personally, I'm a fan of crowd noise, so the more crowd noise we have, the better. But for this year, obviously without fans on site, we've partnered with one of our partners, IBM, to come up with taking crowd noise from last year. They run their AI magic to it, and this year it's going to simulate the crowd noise from last year. So we think it's going to be pretty unique versus some of what some of the other sports have done at this point.
So let's understand what all that means, because there's a lot of technology underneath that. Noah Sykin is with us, Vice President of Sports and Entertainment Partnerships at IBM. He joins us on the phone real close to me here in Westchester. Noah, really nice to have you with us. I really wish we were talking later in the week and sitting outside of Ashe, but here we are. So tell us what I'm going to see, because I'm going to be tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and trust me, nobody would rather be out at the tennis center than me. But we've been hard at work. You know, there may not be fans in the stadium, but the U.S. Open is live and going on. And so IBM has been building the digital platforms for the U.S. Open for many years, for about 29 years, and this year is no different. We're bringing AI and cloud computing to the U.S. Open to help fans engage in different ways and also create some atmosphere in the stadiums like you just heard about.
So is that more for me watching it, or is that for the players?
Yeah, so there's going to be a mix of different types of sounds. What we've done is we've been listening to the sounds of tennis for about 4 years. We understand what a first-round match sounds like, what a finals match sounds like, what a match on Arthur Ashe versus Armstrong sounds like, what the first-ranked player sounds like, what the 20th-ranked player sounds like.
Oh, my gosh, that's amazing.
We've used AI and put all that together to create a soundboard for ESPN and the USTA to use. So what you'll probably see is a little experimentation along the way, but what you'll see is atmosphere being created in the broadcast by ESPN, because really, you know, there's a certain set of characteristics that they want to present in the broadcast. And then you'll see different types of experiences in the stadium for the fans. The USTA was very focused on bringing some of the players' entourages and guests into the stadium through video, allowing fans to cheer from around the world through the official U.S. Open app. So broadcast one experience, in stadium another experience, both kind of tuned to the unique characteristics of the fans they're trying to please, or the players for that matter.
And Noah, what have you learned from other sports so far?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, really tuning it to the environment. You know, you see in golf, as an example, there's really no crowd noise. They haven't tried to simulate crowd noise, and I don't think much is lost there for that matter. The players might feel a little bit differently, but from a viewer perspective, it's, you know, pretty seamless. And you look at the sports, the team sports that are kind of in the bubble, the NBAs or the NHLs of the world. They've been, they've been experimenting and kind of dialing up the sound, dialing down the sound. And then you look at what's happening in Europe, around some of the soccer matches and getting very bespoke kind of sounds, the unique chants of the stadium. So as a sports fan, I like watching all of it. I'm not sure what I really love yet, but I like how everybody's experimenting and taking different approaches.
So let's fast forward a year and say in 2021 there's a vaccine so people can be then at the stadium. Do you guys do something else using AI for the U.S. Open or something along those lines, or what do you do?
Oh, yeah, well, we're always busy. Again, in terms of running the digital platforms, we do that. But this year, as an example, we're running a program called Open Questions. And so our AI platform called Watson has gone out and read over 14 million documents, different sources of information around tennis. And what's more iconic in the world of sports than having a good debate, right? Who's the greatest player of all time? What's the greatest doubles match pairing of all time? What's the greatest rivalry of all time? Well, Watson has actually put a point of view out around each of those dimensions, around 6 or 7 questions that we've seeded in the marketplace. And if fans go to usopen.org/open questions, they'll be able to participate in those conversations, have their voice heard, and at the end of the tournament, Watson's going to actually take all of that input and try to get some answers to some of those sports questions. So that's an example of what we're doing this year, but those kinds of programs using AI to stimulate fan engagement, that's what we try to do every year. So a little bit of open questions this year. There'll be, we'll extend that technology next year.
Well, and Noah, I had a chance last year to spend some time with some of your colleagues there at the U.S. Open and go sort of down into the bowels of ash and look at some of the technology that's underneath just what's going on in a match. I mean, it is incredible how far you and the USTA and others have come just in enabling technology, even for gameplay in many ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things we haven't spoken about is all of our teams are actually operating remote. The IBM team, we bring 50-plus people every year. The USTA brings hundreds of people. All of those people are operating remote this year, and, that's possible because of the digital transformation we've been on with the USTA for many years, operating in a cloud environment, as an example, really put them in a position for this pretty unique time. So whether it's the operational stuff that nobody sees or the fan-facing fun stuff around open questions and having sports debate or listening to sound, we're kind of touching a lot of different aspects of the U.S. Open, more so than ever.
That is so cool. I want to know the difference between, what's a cheering sound for one match versus another match, or the 20th seed versus the 5th seed player.
Yeah, well,
and I kind of want you to do it.
Yeah. No, just one thing to think about. There's roofs on those stadiums, and so the sound characteristic of the roof being open or the roof being closed can be very different. So, those are the kinds of things that once you start to try to unbundle what's necessary, you get into those finer points that people may not ordinarily think about.
Yeah, it's really cool. Well, definitely will be tuning in and looking forward to seeing what you learn this year in the hopes that it'll be even cooler next year when we're all on site together. Thank you so much. Noah Sykin, Vice President of Sports and Entertainment Partnerships for IBM, joining us on the phone from Westchester. I have to say, Alex, full confession, it's one of the things that it's I've felt this deep pang over not being able to go to the Open this year. Oh, of course, for our broadcast, but also just as a fan, I love going. It is a quintessential. You and I talk about New York all the time. It's a quintessential New York thing.
Yeah, you Westchester guys love that.
Oh boy, here we go.
No, I'm kidding. I love it too.
Yeah, a lot of people in the city love it too.
Me don't like sports. Me love tennis. Yeah, really, really fun.
See, if it can transcend even to you, that's really saying something about the U.S. Open. All right, coming up, we're going to talk about Shutterstock and get down to Washington. This is Bloomberg.